2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Perfect.
Two, 1, 6, 7, Rayburn, testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Audio check. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Only learned to count to 10, so I can't go any further. 1, 2, 3, 4.
We'll get started here in about 2 minutes. The ranker's coming. He's on his way. The Subcommittee on Aviation will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. And as a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for an opening statement for 5 minutes. May 16th, 2025 marked the 1-year anniversary of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 being signed into law, a great legislation. Crafting this legislation was a monumental task that took place over the course of 2 years and involved over 2,100 stakeholders and member requests. Thanks to the leadership of Chairman Graves, the largest and most comprehensive FAA Reauthorization Act was signed into law. This legislation touched every major sector of the aviation industry and included provisions to ensure that the United States remains the global leader in aviation. Specifically, The law maintains aviation safety as the FAA's #1 priority, as it should. Contains the first ever general aviation title to strengthen America's general aviation sector. Addresses workforce development challenges for qualified workers, including pilots, mechanics, and air traffic controllers. Invests in our country's airport infrastructure by expediting project deliveries and prioritizing investments for small and general aviation airports. Ensures a safe and efficient integration of new technologies, such as drones and advanced air mobility, and provides necessary reforms to enhance the passenger experience for the traveling public. The FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 included over 500 mandates for the FAA and the Department of Transportation to implement over the course of 5 years. I'm eager to hear from our witnesses today about the progress that has or has not been made in implementing the law. Today, we have representatives from a broad cross-section of aviation stakeholders, including general aviation, new entrants, and commercial airlines. It is critical that we hear from all of them as we work to ensure that this law is implemented as Congress intended. I want to acknowledge up front that implementing a law of this scale, it's no small task. It requires coordination, persistence, and a unified effort across government and industry. That said, history tells us that the relevant agencies have often struggled. They've struggled to meet such a challenge. In fact, numerous provisions of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018 and even some policy directives from the 2016 FAA extension have yet to be implemented to this day. And quite honestly, that's unacceptable. While the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 was comprehensive, ambitious, and challenging, it set an achievable timeline for implementation and reform. Our reputation as a world leader in aviation is on the line, but I am extremely confident that the Trump administration will get it right. I look forward to partnering with both President Trump and Secretary Duffy to protect and maintain that hard-earned reputation. And while progress has been made on the implementation of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024, several important provisions have been delayed, such as Section 372, the establishment of an enhanced qualification program for restricted airline transport pilot, which ATP certificates, that utilizes best-in-class simulator technology to ensure that we have the best trained and safest pilots in the world. Section 930, a rulemaking that will allow for scaled, safe, beyond visual line of sight operations for unmanned aircraft systems in United States airspace. Section 1110, a report that provides an update on the creation of federal and international policies that would establish the United States as the global leader in civil supersonic aircraft. It is essential that this subcommittee, along with the broader aviation community, hold the DOT and FAA accountable to achieve the goals set forth in our legislation. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. I look forward to working with each one of you to ensure this pivotal law gets implemented on time and as intended. I now recognize Ranking Member Cohen for 5 minutes for an opening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A little over a year ago, we passed the bipartisan FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. It was a big, beautiful bill. It was landmark legislation to strengthen every facet of our aviation ecosystem. We met with all of the groups involved, the private sector, and we incorporated your suggestions, and we got it all in there. There were a few things that for quite a few years was all included. 80 provisions specifically aimed at improving aviation safety in the U.S., while other provisions will advance innovation and build upon the strength of our U.S. aviation economy. But laws and words do not save lives. It's the timely and accountable implementation is so important. And today, sadly, the stakes are higher than ever. The tragic collision over the Potomac earlier this year really brought it to our attention. Disturbing rise in near misses have exposed additional serious vulnerabilities in the system. They're stark reminders of the work to modernize and secure our aviation infrastructure cannot wait. We must remain vigilant in the existing law's execution as well as be on the lookout for solutions to new problems. One of our most urgent needs today is to modernize our air traffic control system. FAA data and recent assessments show that too many of our systems are outdated and the controller staffing shortages are stretching an already strained workforce, including operational risk. In our previous administration tried to bring $8 billion in to work on that. The timing didn't work and the coordination with the Senate didn't work, but they saw the problem and had an $8 billion request to start continue upgrading. They'd already started with $1 billion a year, the air traffic control system. Nowhere has this been clearer than Newark Airport, where ATC equipment failures and staffing challenges have disrupted operations and raised safety concerns. Apparently, United says that they had the best on-flight, on-schedule performance of any airports in the New York metropolitan area recently, and they've got the runway completed, and things should be fine in Newark. Let's hope so. Congress gave the FAA clear directives through the 2024 reauthorization to modernize critical infrastructure, expedite deployment of new technologies, and hire and train the next generation of air traffic controllers. This was not a suggestion, it was a mandate, and we need to see results. The chair puts on an appearance, a facade of being a nice, friendly, easygoing guy. He's not. He wants this done and done now. He'll be on your case if you don't do it. At the same time, we must ensure that the FAA keeps pace with emerging technologies like advanced air mobility, drones, and autonomous systems. The 2024 reauthorization laid the groundwork, but delays in regulatory action risk ceding America's leadership in aviation innovation to global competitors. We cannot afford to fall behind. Equally important is growing our aviation workforce, from pilots and mechanics to controllers and flight attendants. The aviation sector depends on a highly trained, highly skilled workforce. For this reason, Congress included numerous reforms and new programs in the FAA law to help recruit and develop the next generation of aviation professionals and keep them safe. Too many violent attacks on flight attendants and the airplanes. It needs to stop, and hopefully that we'll find out where we stand with that. Unfortunately, the administration has moved swiftly in the wrong direction, downsizing and terminating the very people and technical expertise responsible for the law's implementation. How much of this was the new transportation, FAA administration? How much of it was DOGE and Mr. Musk? And maybe it was a bad day. Maybe his drugs weren't balanced or something. But they eliminated a lot of people we needed, and that's one of the problems we've got. It's critical that the FAA reverse this ill-conceived course and move quickly to implement the carefully constructed provisions of the law. I look forward to working with Chair Nels and our committee leaders Graves and Larson to begin developing a bipartisan ATC modernization package that ensures our aviation system is the safest, it's innovative, and is the most resilient in the world. Appreciate the witnesses for joining us today. Look forward to hearing your perspectives on progress made and challenges remain as we continue our oversight of the FAA. I yield back.
Thank you, Steve, for your kind words. I would like to now welcome our witnesses and thank them for being here today. Thank you all. Take a moment to explain our lighting system. 3 lights in front of you: green, go, obviously; yellow, you're running out of time; and red, please wrap up your remarks. I ask unanimous consent that the witness's full statement be included into the record. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments or information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Mr. Pleasance, you are recognized for the 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Ranking Member Mr. Cohen and the rest of the members of the committee. I'm Darren Pleasance. I'm the President and CEO of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, or AOPA. And I'm privileged and pleased to be here to provide testimony back on our view on how the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 is being implemented. Just for level setting, general aviation is essentially all aviation that is not military and not commercial aviation. So it's a very vibrant and diverse portion of our aviation ecosystem. There are over 5,000 public airports, 14,000 landing strips, heliports, and other landing facilities that make up this important and critical part of our national infrastructure around the country. I'd like to commend, as the chairman said, full committee Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Larson and this broader committee for your great work last year, bipartisan work, in passing the FAA Reauthorization Bill of 2024. It was a landmark piece of legislation, as was alluded to a few moments ago. A particularly important part of that was that it included a very specific call out for general aviation that had never been a part of the bill in the past. And in there were specific policies and programs that directly benefit and enhance the vitality of general aviation in this country. And we feel very grateful for that work being done. This hearing gives us the opportunity today to speak about what is happening with the implementation, but also follows nicely on the other work that's happening with President Trump and with Secretary Duffy on the work to modernize ATC. It wasn't a specific part of the bill, but it's an important part, as Ranking Member Cohen alluded to ensuring that we maintain preeminence in the world. So I look forward to being able to speak to that. We also appreciate, and I specifically appreciate, this committee's work on creating a down payment, let's call it the $12.5 billion funding to help at least get the modernization effort going, so appreciate that. AOPA is a member of the Modern Skies Coalition, which is a group of many aviation organizations across the country who are stacking hands and aligning on the importance of ATC modernization. And we meet regularly, and we are fully behind the efforts of this committee to help take that from concept to reality. We do currently, I think this is important not to lose sight of, we have the safest aviation ecosystem in the world. It remains the safest in the world, but that doesn't mean we can't be better. And so we feel strongly as AOPA and in partnership with others up here that we need to continue to work together to help make it even better into the future. There are too many areas within the FAA Reauthorization Act for me to speak to all of them, so I thought I would just call out a few of them and provide perspective back on those. One is around privacy. It's very important to pilots to be able to maintain privacy, and there was an aspect of the bill that required the FAA to put in place the means for pilots to withhold their personal information and separate it, in a sense, from the aircraft registry. That work has been done and was just recently implemented about a month and a half ago or so we feel pleased with that. Conversely, though, we do still have concerns around the area of ADS-B, and that's unfortunately become a term that I suspect most of you know about because of the DC accident not that many months ago, where ADS-B is the technology that plays such a critical role in ensuring aircraft don't run into each other. And increasingly, we're seeing that technology being used for things other than safety, whether it's collecting fees of some sorts or frivolous lawsuits or other sorts of FAA enforcement action, which in our view goes counter to the primary premise of ADS-B, which was safety. And anything that occurs that puts safety at risk or deters people from implementing this technology is concerning to us. We think there's more work to do there. Basic Med is an area this committee years ago partnered with AOPA and others in the industry to create an easier way for pilots to get their medical so they can fly. And this committee was able to create Basic Med in a way that's allowed more than 90,000 pilots now to take advantage of that without any reduction in safety. The most recent FAA Reauthorization Bill enhanced that, and that has been implemented. So we're quite happy with where Basic Med has arrived today. Still more work to be done, partnership with Canada and others, but we feel good about where that is. Fee transparency is an area of concern. The GAO, as part of the authorization bill, was required to go out and basically ensure that the fixed-base operators around the country are in fact establishing transparency with their fees and pricing so that as pilots use this national airspace infrastructure, we're able to ensure they have visibility into what those fees will be. We would like to partner with the GAO to help them do that. We get calls almost every day on this topic, and we're concerned about some of the egregious fees we're starting to see at specific airports. The one other thing I'll call out is aeromedical. While the FAA ATC system needs to be enhanced and modernized, so does the FAA aeromedical. Dr. Susan Northrup's done a tremendous job, we believe, in moving things forward and making significant progress. However, there's more to do, and there's a lot of technology involved to help her and her team do what they need to do. So with that, I'd like to again thank the committee for allowing us to present and opine on how things are going, and I look forward to questions from the committee over the balance of the morning.
Thank you, Mr. Pleasance. With that, Mr. Boland, you are recognized for correction. I think Tracy Mann. Tracy would like to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm honored to introduce our next witness, Mr. Ed Boland. Ed is the president and CEO of National Business Aviation Association, a position he's held since 2004. Ed is also from my hometown of Salina, Kansas, and a graduate of University of Kansas. Through his role at NBAA, Ed represents more than 11,000 aviation companies and professionals who rely on general aviation aircraft, advocating for the advancement of new technologies and products, enhancing safety, and recruiting a skilled workforce, all to strengthen the future of American aviation. Ed is also a past president and CEO of GAMA as well. So thanks to his extensive knowledge and experience during his distinguished career, and I appreciate him being willing to share with us here this morning. Thanks for being here, Ed.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. Like Congressman Mann, I'm enormously proud to be a son of Kansas and to have an opportunity to represent a great American industry as we work together to do something really important for this country. Mr. Chairman, I want to begin by acknowledging a couple things that have been mentioned about safety and about the accident on January 29th. And certainly that galvanizes us, helps us understand the importance and the urgency of the work that we are doing today. I think, you know, when you discussed last year's bill, you mentioned that it was large and that it was comprehensive. It was also very forward-leaning. The parts of the bill, including the general aviation title, the efforts to foster emerging technologies, the attention to the medical records and encouraging pilots to get help, the foundation laid on NOTAMs, and all of the efforts on workforce are really critical. And I think now that that bill is the law of the land, we've got a clear pathway on where we go from here. First, it's critical that we implement that bill. And I commend you for the hearing that was held on the one-year anniversary and continuing those hearings today. I think what we are seeing is there are parts of that bill that are being moved out on and moved out quickly. We're enormously pleased, for example, that the SFAR related to advanced air mobility and the pilot training has been done, and we're looking forward to those aircraft being certified soon. And BVLOS was mentioned. We're anticipating action on that. So I think a lot of good work is being done. I think all of us need to commit to making sure that great bill is implemented. So that's step number one. Step number two is we need to move forward on the plan that was laid out on May 8th by the Secretary and by the FAA Administrator. I think what we recognize is that what was being proposed, what is on the table, is something that is unique in its scope and its specificity and its accountability and, importantly, its timelines. The proposal focuses on modernizing by investing in people, facilities, and equipment. And to that end, we have the Secretary who has called for 14,000 air traffic controllers, highly skilled, highly motivated, and we see steps being taken to make that a reality. That is a critical issue. With regard to facilities, he has laid out investments that need to be made, 6 air traffic control centers, deployment of 15 TRACONs, 15 new towers. He's made it clear that we want to increase connectivity with broadband, with cellular, with satellite, and he has made sure that we are focused on bringing in the latest generation of radios and radars. And in fact, yesterday I saw that he announced bringing in industry for a conversation on how we can get this done. I think it's really important to underscore that the entire industry is united in this proposal under the Modern Skies banner. I think this is probably as united as our community has been for an investment in our air transportation system since the creation of the Airport and Airways Trust Fund in 1970. I think importantly, the community is united on getting this done and not being distracted with debates that look to others, including Canada, with their overhyped and underperforming models. I think what we see is the opportunity for American innovation and American ingenuity to lead the way and I can't imagine a more fitting way to honor the legacy of the families and the victims of the 29th of January accident than having us make sure that the United States continues to have the largest, the safest, the most diverse mix of aircraft and operations anywhere in the world. We want to lead and continue to have the United States be the gold standard for all things aviation.
Thank you, Mr. Bolin. Mr. Robbins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Cohen, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm Michael Robbins. I'm the President and CEO of AUVSI. We're the world's largest trade association representing the uncrewed systems, robotics, and autonomy industry. And I'm delighted to be here with you today representing our members in the UAS or drone and advanced air mobility industries. It's a particularly significant week for our industry, particularly the drone side, as we expect that the Trump administration will release a series of executive orders on the drone industry this week, reflecting the growing national priority placed on uncrewed systems. And while we await the official details, AUVSI has been working closely with the administration, engaged throughout this process, and stand ready to work with both the White House and Congress to accelerate safe integration, enhance security, and strengthen U.S. leadership. AUVSI, like our colleagues, commends this committee's leadership in crafting and passing the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024, which obviously represents a strong bipartisan commitment to strengthening safety, fast-tracking innovation, and preserving U.S. leadership in global aviation. And our industry in particular welcomed the clarity and direction the law provided in specific titles which will guide the safe and scalable integration of drones and AAM technologies into the national airspace, including mandating performance-based rulemaking and expanding certification pathways. But as mentioned, legislation is only the beginning. The promise of this reauthorization and its impact on jobs and public safety, infrastructure, and importantly, global leadership and competitiveness depends entirely on how well and how quickly the law is implemented. Today, we're going to highlight where the FAA is making progress, where it's falling behind, and how this committee's continued oversight is critical to meeting the full potential of the law. So a few key points. First, we appreciate the FAA's recent momentum in approving more waivers and exemptions for beyond visual line of sight or BVLOS operations. These approvals are indeed driving real-world value in public safety, infrastructure inspection, agriculture, disaster response, and more. However, these case-by-case waivers are not a substitute for a comprehensive rule, and they do not allow the industry to scale. This delays investment, operational planning, and public benefit. As Chairman Nels mentioned, Section 930 of the Reauthorization Law set firm deadlines for the long-awaited Part 108 BVLOS rule. The first of those deadlines has been missed. It's been missed, as of today, by 261 days. And yep, we're counting, because every day matters to our industry. We got very close last year after a valiant effort by the FAA to move the rule forward, but ultimately bureaucracy won. Today, due to the leadership of Secretary Duffy and Administrator Rocheleau, the draft rule is back at the White House for the interagency review, and we have urged the immediate release of the draft. And again, it is a draft. We have repeatedly reminded the regulators that this is only a step in the process and is by no means the end of the rulemaking, and accordingly, perfect should not be the enemy of the good for a draft. We urge the administration to maintain momentum and deliver a final rule as close as possible to the original statutory deadline. And that same urgency applies to Section 2209 of the 2016 FAA Extension Act, reaffirmed in Section 929 of the 2024 reauthorization, directing the FAA to establish a process for critical infrastructure operators to petition for restrictions on drone flights near sensitive sites. Nearly a decade later, that process still doesn't exist. Beyond rulemaking, the FAA must also move quickly to implement Section 906, which directs the agency to study and adopt electronic conspicuity solutions. In an increasingly complex airspace, especially at lower altitudes, situational awareness is vital. As my colleague at AOPA mentioned, ADS-B coverage is limited and not mandated in all airspace, and many types of aircraft lack broadcast capability. But electronic conspicuity technologies available in the marketplace today and used elsewhere in the world can help scale and close that gap, enhancing safety and driving us towards a zero collision airspace. This technology enables mutual awareness between all aircraft, protecting safety and privacy, while enhancing operational flexibility, and the FAA should move swiftly to approve and promote these technologies. We'd also like to thank this committee, as well as Secretary Duffy and Administrator Rocheleau, for moving boldly with plans to upgrade our aging air traffic control system. AUVSI is also a proud member of the Modern Skies Coalition, and we urge that modernization investments include low-altitude airspace awareness and digital infrastructure investments to ensure the future national airspace can safely accommodate both crewed and autonomous operations at scale. Thank you for your leadership and for holding this important oversight hearing. The FAA Reauthorization Act offers a bold roadmap for the future of aviation. Now it's time to execute. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Captain Riven, you are recognized.
Chairman Nails, Ranking Member Cohen, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify, share the perspective of more than 11,000 commercial airline pilots at Southwest Airlines Pilots Association. My name is Jody Reven. I'm a current 737 captain at Southwest Airlines and president of SWAPA. SWAPA is one of the largest independent pilot unions in the world and is a sole bargaining unit for the professional pilots of Southwest Airlines. SWAPA has been dedicated to aviation safety and security since 1978. I'm pleased to participate in today's discussion about the 2024 FAA Reauthorization and Air Traffic Systems, Personnel, and Aviation Safety. Let me begin by saying that the pilots of Southwest Airlines are heartbroken about the tragedy in DCA in January. We share our deepest condolences with the families and passengers of the crew of American 5342 and PAT 21. We're committed to working with this committee, Congress, and all aviation stakeholders to ensure similar tragedy never happens again. Safety and operational excellence are not guaranteed. Our system relies on industry-wide collaboration. SWAPA is proud to be a leader in safety data collection and analysis, risk identification, and mitigation. Southwest pilots are among the most productive in the world, operating over 4,000 flights a day to 120 domestic and international airports. SWAPA partners with the FAA, labor partners, airlines, and industry with one goal, and that's to keep the national airspace system, the safest and most efficient in the world. We carry 1.5 million passengers a year, and the SWAPA pilots depend on that safety. SWAPA supports immediate actions to implement long overdue technology upgrades, increase air traffic control staffing, equip the FAA to recapitalize its systems and processes to meet the demands of an increasingly complex airspace. The pilots of Southwest Airlines are industry leaders in incorporating technology that increases awareness and provides tools to help pilots and controllers make safe decisions. Unfortunately, the system's potential is not fully realized. Recent high-profile issues have demonstrated that ATC facilities are not properly equipped or staffed. All aircraft, including rotorcraft and advanced air mobility systems, must properly be equipped with technology that provides ATC and other pilots with critical situational awareness to mitigate risks. The incidents, including a recent one at Chicago Midway Airport, where two Southwest pilots recognized safety and avoided a hazardous runway incursion, has reinforced that we have to have a minimum complement of two pilots in every cockpit. In discussions with Secretary Duffy after this incident took place, we made the point there's really no technological solution that can overcome the risks introduced by reducing the flight deck complement. Flight deck and ATC technology are support tools and never a replacement for experience and rested, fully trained pilots and air traffic controllers and flight attendants. SWAPA thanks the committee for the 5-year bipartisan FAA reauthorization bill that expedites the hiring of air traffic controllers, strengthens the aviation workforce while protecting experience requirements, and accelerates the development and deployment of advanced technologies, including the new surface safety technology, runway and taxi signage, and lighting systems. We also want to thank this community and the FAA for their commitment to increasing transparency and the efficiency in the FAA's Office of Aerospace Medicine. Expanding the number of aerospace medical examiners and reducing the processing times for aeromedical certificates are essential steps to maintaining a strong pipeline of well-trained and experienced pilots. SWAPA fully supports this administration's budget, which funds the FAA's technology and facilities account at $4 billion. The system urgently needs sustained, robust budget requests and immediate infusion of funding. SWAPA also applauds Chairman Gray's critical first step in moving forward with the $12.5 billion of funding. We'd like to thank this administration and this body for making our nation's air traffic control system a priority. We look forward to working with the administration and Congress to make this a reality. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Captain. Ms. Nelson, you're recognized.
Chair Nils, Ranking Member Cohen, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Sarah Nelson. I'm the president of the Association of Flight Attendants and a 30-year flight attendant myself, representing 55,000 flight attendants at 20 different airlines. We are grateful for the opportunity to testify with the perspective of aviation's first responders and our sister unions representing other aviation workers. The 2024 FAA Reauthorization Act was an incredibly important step forward in addressing decades of missed opportunities in shoring up our national aviation system. We applaud this committee on your efforts to get it passed and implemented, and we commend Secretary Duffy on his plans to supercharge staffing and modernization. With deep respect for the families of PSA Flight 5342 and PAT 25, and lives lost in aviation tragedies in the past, we must always put safety and security first and redouble efforts to plug holes and mitigate risks in the system. Safety first, always. But aviation is also critical for our entire economy and connectivity across the country and around the world. My written testimony addresses our safety priorities in the law and the status of implementation, including important workplace safety that also affects passengers, contaminated recirculated air, temperature standards, ramp safety, radiation exposure, flight deck secondary barriers, standards for good jobs in aviation, mitigating cybersecurity risks, and addressing issues with disruptive passengers. With the exception of the work by the National Academy of Sciences, much of this has been delayed or sidelined by this administration's actions to disband safety advisory committees and rulemaking committees. But we are also very concerned that actions to fire probationary federal workers, implement the deferred resignation program, put in place hiring freezes, and put in jeopardy the federal worker pensions and health care with budget cuts that come from the bottom to give massive tax cuts to the rich who do not need it, undermine the work of this committee and the diligent efforts of the Secretary to shore up our national aviation system. The Wall Street Journal published an article recently that highlights concern over staff departures that could affect, quote, the processing of medical clearances for pilots and air traffic controllers, work on runway safety, and the pace of licensing in the agency's commercial space offices. We are also getting direct reports that the loss of employees that support the frontline safety professionals is taking a toll as HR and security screeners at the FAA have taken the deferred resignation program, and this is slowing the hiring process, directly harming the focus of this committee and Secretary Duffy's plans to supercharge the changes we need. Every worker at the FAA contributes to safety, whether deemed essential or not. The staffing cuts, disruptions, and distractions to the safety work of those who maintain and enforce the standards of our aviation system is simply unacceptable. It's also important to recognize that other agencies contribute significantly to aviation safety, including the National Weather Service, NIOSH, and USAID. The cuts to these agencies and personnel are directly undermining efforts to get the information and structure we need to keep us safe in all airspace, on the ground around the world, and able to keep threats to our safety, such as Ebola or other communicable disease, from being spread throughout and by our aviation system. DOJ should not be allowed to undermine safety in the name of efficiency. As aviation's first responders, we are charged with the safety, health, and security of all passengers and crew on our flight, and we promise our own families that we will come home safely too. Aviation safety is personal to us, just as it is for tens of thousands of federal workers who take part in helping us keep the promise to our families and our loved ones in our care. It is the product of hundreds of thousands of workers, from engineers to mechanics to safety inspectors, security officers, pilots, gate agents, baggage handlers, flight attendants, and air traffic controllers, asking all day long, is it safe? We ask this question with the information we have from tragic moments of gaps in safety and promises to the memory of those we've lost and the families with whom we grieve, that it will never happen again. This starts with supporting a thorough investigation, continues with advocacy for reform, and lives forever in our repeated analysis all day long, is it safe? Aviation is the safest mode of transportation because we demand it. And we built a system that allows us to predict risk, produce redundancies, and fill holes to keep tragedy at bay. The FAA holds the statutory mandate to ensure the highest degree of aviation safety. Our industry has been through many ups and downs. We cannot control the weather, but we can commit to steady funding, no shutdowns, the highest standards, broad recruitment, including the promise of good, steady jobs, and working with the people on the front lines who know the system best, how to fix it, what it lacks, and what it needs. We applaud and support the subcommittees focused on the safest, most efficient national airspace system in the world. We are committed to fulfilling this mission with you and all of our partners in aviation safety, health, and security. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson, and thank you all for your testimony. We will now turn to questions from the panel. I'll recognize myself. Mr. Bolin, certification delays of business aircraft. Business aircraft have long been a concern, particularly with the introduction of new technologies such as advanced air mobility. Do you believe that the FAA is progressing in modernizing and streamlining its certification process as required in our reauthorization of 2024?
Well, as you know, the reauthorization bill did require some certification reforms, help digitize a lot of the work that is being done, and certainly the signing of the SFAR last October provided the enabling legislation or the enabling regulation to be able to start those operations. I think we're very interested in seeing the first advanced air mobility aircraft certified potentially as early as the end of this year, maybe early next year, and beginning operations. A number of very exciting demonstration programs have been launched, and I think we feel very encouraged about ushering in this new era of aviation.
Have the delays impacted innovation in your sector?
I think there's always a critical balance when technologies are coming forward, but I think there is a growing recognition that innovation and technology makes us safer, and that safety delayed is not a way for us to promote safety. So I think we're on track on focusing on making these things happen.
Very well. Last month, I introduced the Supersonic Aviation Modernization Act, which I firmly believe will foster aviation innovation across America. As you know, my bill would direct the FAA to revise and issue regulations that permit civil supersonic flights in the national airspace, so long as no boom, no supersonic boom breaks grandma's window on the ground, right? It won't reach the ground. Could you explain why it's critically important for the FAA to revise the current 1973? You weren't even born in 1973, were you?
I was a graduate.
Well,
That prohibits non-military. I mean,
Right.
we're talking about non-military flights
Right.
over the United States.
Yeah. The 1973 law, as you know, was based on the technology that was understood at that time. Sure. And huge amounts of research and development by private companies, by NASA and others, have really changed that technology. Yeah. You're well aware of the boom flight that has been able to go without creating that type of sonic boom that was so prevalent in 1973. We all know that what aircraft do is connect people, and they're time machines. And so I think our advancements through the years have been focused on flying farther, flying safer, flying faster, and flying more sustainably.
I firmly believe that by the FAA establishing a clear science and evidence-based framework for civil supersonic aviation while ensuring no noise, safety, or environmental concerns, we will allow American industry to innovate and maintain leadership in global aviation policy. I appreciate NBAA's support of my legislation, so thank you for that. Look forward to working with you to get this legislation through Congress. Ms. Nelson, 55,000 flight attendants, over 20 airlines. I was reviewing your written testimony. I think there's several sections, probably 12, 14 of them, that are priorities for your union. Section 321 deals with turbulence-related injuries. I think Section 323 dealing with the temperature, I think that's in progress. The FAA is working on that. The cockpit secondary barriers, I believe that is in progress as well. Section 432, the crew member interference, I think that is a concern for everybody. I mean, what we're seeing with Section 434-2 with employee assaults, that is complete, it's my understanding. That section is complete with dealing with the employee assault precautions. Is that not in? How are you doing? How do you feel the FAA is responding to some of the priorities that you have that was in our FAA reauthorization?
So we have issues here because the issues that deal with safety, with security, were generally referred to ASAC, which was the committee that was disbanded. It had been in place since the Pan Am flight crash of over 30 years ago. And so that much of that work around the security issues has been set aside because that committee is no longer in place. Now, we understand that there are efforts to reestablish it. We're looking forward to that very much, and we hope that it will continue to be representative from across the entire aviation industry. We think it was a very important committee that provided a lot of important work for our security.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll now recognize Ranking Member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Nelson, I'll continue with you. How do you feel about this proposal or this concern of the safety of flight attendants and interactions with unruly passengers being sent to a committee that hasn't existed since Pan American Airlines was around, which I recall?
I hope that I heard you correctly, but this is a concern. We need real focus on disruptive passengers, and as our flights are fuller than ever and our staffing is at minimums, it is very, very difficult for flight attendants to get to the source of a conflict and de-escalate with our skills. Oftentimes that rises up, and we have had concussions and broken teeth and all kinds of problems because we don't have enough focus on trying to keep those disruptive passengers from getting back on our planes again and coordinating that information across the industry.
I don't recall these incidents occurring more than 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Has it been more of a modern problem, current problem than the past?
In fairness, Congressman, we were working on issues of air rage in the 1990s, and we got some of those first fines and jail time in the bill in 2000. But we are seeing this at a rate that we have never seen before. So you are correct that we are seeing this at a higher rate. Part of that has to do with the conditions on our planes, that people are jammed in together. There's a lot more bodies. There's a lot less space to move around. People come a little upset because they've got smaller seats, no place to put their bags, and sometimes their bags are taken from them. And so there are a lot of stressors that are added to our environment. You add into that, in addition to that, alcohol, and it is a recipe for real problems up in the air and even during the boarding process.
Let me follow up on the idea of smaller seats and less room to move and being crammed in. The EVAC Act, which is something I've been working on for years and it's passed, but it's never quite been implemented because they don't give a representative census of the population of an aircraft. Seniors and people with disabilities and youngsters aren't included. How do you feel like the FAA is doing on getting that reform to see to it that the test that they do to see if the 90-second rule can apply is being carried forth?
We're working on getting the study, but this has been a direction from the 2018 bill that we are trying to continue to press the FAA to move on, and we are still working with outdated data in certifying evacuation standards for the aircraft. And that is leading to cabins that are jam-packed and conditions that do not recognize, as you said, the population that we have today. We have a larger population. People are generally larger today. We have people, our airplanes are open to everyone. So we have passengers with disabilities, we have young children, and none of this is factored in the evacuation standards. So both the human factors and also the size of the seats and how close they are together, that is not taken into consideration for those evacuation standards today, and that needs desperately to be updated.
Do flight attendants get any training on people with specific and medical conditions, like people with autism, and how you would deal with them in a situation where you had a crash?
Are we getting training on that?
Yes.
Not directly on that. It is mentioned in our training, but we do not have direct and specific training on that.
Thank you very much. Captain Revan, your testimony highlights the need to modernize the system. What should the FAA do first to tackle the problems in the system and to reduce risk about the national aerospace system?
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member Cohen. I think what we're doing is a very good approach. I like, what was in the bill. One of the biggest things we talk about is one level of safety and one level of security, so that our traveling public is safe. We also, and we were pleased to see in the bill, removal of a loophole that allowed Part 135 operators to sell 121 tickets. Also, I think what we've done in security and safety with the ground markings, with ADSB, with RAS, it's a good first step.
My time's about out. I do want to ask you this. As a pilot, do you see any problems in the relationship in pilots and co-pilots in guiding an airplane safely? Are there any interactions that you find to be difficult, or is that dealt with in training too?
So I think we deal with 3 or 4 generations sometimes in a seniority list, and we work through those issues. We're trained very well. We have yearly discussions about that. Cockpit resource management is of the utmost. We have professional aviators out there that, the Midway incident is a great teamwork type of example, where a captain's very focused on landing in a short runway and the first officer's watching an evolving situation. Frankly, jumped in and saved the day. And so they work well together up there regardless. We have a very standardized procedure so that every person that shows up and flies with me in the right seat has the singular model on what he's thinking is going to take place in the cockpit, how we run checklists, et cetera. So not a lot of problems.
So you as a 737 pilot realize the pilots and co-pilots do work together, and that's not a problem in aviation?
Absolutely true. Absolutely rely on each other.
If the chair would give me just one more second or minute. Mr. Robbins, you are the president of Association of Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International. Now, as he mentioned, 1973, I was around. 1973, we wouldn't have had an association of Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International.
It was the year we were founded, actually.
Was it?
Yeah.
The only thing I remember then was you put some water in a cylinder and you pulled it back and it flew, and that was in your yard. You've come a long way.
We have.
Ukraine had a big week with drones. Are drones becoming most significant military vehicle for the future in this world? And do you have members in your organization that are working on drones as weapons?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for that question. I believe that we do have a number of members. We are both a commercial and defense trade association. We do have a number of our member companies that are working on various forms of military UAVs, whether that's for ISR or weaponization or contested logistics. So certainly the future of military is autonomous. Ultimately, robots don't bleed, and it's been clear from the higher echelons throughout the Department of Defense that moving towards more autonomous systems not only extends our operational reach, it also ensures that we're protecting our warfighters. So yes, the future of our military is autonomous, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pleasance, I'm going to turn to you for some questions just to lead up to them. As you note in your testimony, for 86 years, AOPA has stayed true to its mission of protecting the freedom to fly, guiding, protecting, and promoting this uniquely American experience so we can pass it along better than we received it to the next generation of aviators. And with that in mind, I think now is probably the most important time for AOPA's mission and its criticality, as I describe left-wing activists seeking to destroy the ability of folks in the United States to travel as they see fit and to exercise their freedom in private aviation. And with that in mind, there are efforts being made regarding aviation fuels to seek to make it prohibitively expensive in this mindless pursuit for sustainable aviation fuels. We've not only attempted to subsidize SAFs, that goes back to the Obama administration. We've done that. It's among other things, it establishes a government-created market for ethanol under the guise of environmentalism. And then, of course, we've got to have the jobs that, that they just have to continue for this, for the new market that was created, this Soviet-style program. The tax credits are $1.25 per gallon, up to $1.75. And after this January, now we have a production tax credit for 35 cents a gallon as the base up to $1.75. And beyond that grift, there's another grift for in the IRA, which created a $250 million competitive grant program for the blending, storage, transportation, et cetera, of fast aviation sustainable fuels. We have a long history and a sordid history of subsidies, but even after all this, it accounts for 0.3%, 0.3%. And the goal by 2030 is 3 billion gallons, of which we are about 93 million gallons. We're far, far from that. And with that in mind, the cost associated, production cost, 2 to 10 times that of regular fuel, 2 to 10 times. Aviation is expensive enough on its own, but paying 2 to 10 times more for fuel just because we can make it when we have abundant fuel otherwise is quite literally, it's crazy. But beyond that, the people that want these fuels don't think that that's enough, right? That's not even enough for them, particularly for GA pilots. They want you all to fly less. And that's the only thing that's going to appease them. Let's face it, the only thing that's really going to appease them is that when you don't fly at all. So with that in mind, as the leader of AOPA, and thinking particularly about the increased price of fuel, which increases the cost of flying, what is AOP's plan to address what I would characterize as an insane activism to jack up the price for fuel and to have us, end this misguided, quixotic mission to use something other than what has worked for decades upon decades now safely and is abundant and is affordable. What's your plan?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman, for the question. And you're right, this is, at AOPA's core, is out protecting our collective freedom to fly. Fees and expenses are just an underlying constraint on that mission. And you mentioning SAF and the, I'll say, broader set of fees, the ones that I talked about in my opening statement, whether it's FBO fees, landing fees, insurance, all these costs begin to add on top. So we wake up every day looking at how those fees are changing over time and what role can we play in helping to drive those down. To your specific question then, I think we take several tacks on that. One is, where is the future going? So you talk about SAF, I can use another example, would be unleaded fuel, going from leaded to unleaded fuel.
That's my next one, the Eagle Act, and then another crazy initiative where literally some airports have banned regular fuel, and it's resulted in accidents and incidents. All for no reason. There's absolutely zero reason to do any of this, and it increases the cost. So as the advocates for all GA pilots, where do you stand on? You can tell where I stand. Where do you stand?
Yes. Well, so we will resist everything that increases the cost to fly, right? Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be zero, because it does cost money to run the infrastructure and to produce the fuels that we use. In the case of unleaded fuels, that's one that we're probably more supportive than not, because there's only one producer of tetraethyl lead in the world over in the UK, and we're concerned about the future, the availability of that one. We're basically
Maybe we should subsidize that.
I don't know if we subsidize that.
We should, but that's another story.
But we have one producer in the world who makes that, so we as a country are beholden on one single manufacturer, so that concerns us. And for those of us who've used unleaded fuel, it actually works well in the airplane, so in the engine. So there are constraints between today and being able to widely roll a fuel like that out that we are concerned about, some safety-related concerns. But we'll advocate for that transition to be done in a safe and thoughtful way. More broadly to your question, though, around fees, a big part of it is pushing back, just like you are. I fully agree with, if you look at the full spectrum of fees out there, many of them raise serious questions as to the viability of why such a change would be imposed on what is, as has been said earlier, the most vibrant aviation ecosystem in the world. And for someone like me who's traveled the world and seen aviation across Europe, across Asia, it's remarkable when you come back to this country and see how vibrant it is and how widespread the use of general aviation is to support even the general public, whether it's medevac or firefighting and all of these practices that happen that unfortunately most of the general public doesn't realize. So I'll end with saying, I think one of the biggest things we can do with AOPA is to educate the public on how important this infrastructure is that we have and how important this world of general aviation is to the economy and to their very lives, whether it's teaching the future airline pilots of the world to fly, whether it's handling a medevac flight, whether it's disaster recovering and delivering supplies to a post-hurricane environment. All of those things are general aviation. And my hope, and we fight this battle every day, is that as more people hear and appreciate the value that general aviation provides, some of the crazy stuff that's happening out there gets less momentum because people do want to support what we all know and love so much.
I yield. Gentleman yields, and now recognize Mr. Garcia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses here today. I just want to obviously emphasize that all the issues that are being discussed today are at the top of mind for a lot of folks. Certainly when I'm back home, people talk to me about the price of healthcare, they talk to me about the cost of goods, and they talk to me about safety at our airports, at our airlines, and what's happening at the FAA. It is at the top of mind of constituents across my community, and I think across the country. And so these hearings and these questions are really important, so I want to thank all of you. I know that obviously staffing challenges is a huge issue for the FAA, especially for air traffic controllers. As an example, I represent the Long Beach Airport, back in my home community of Long Beach. This is an airport that is a municipal airport run by the city. I served as mayor there for 8 years, and so I know the airport really well. I've had a chance to meet, and I know much of the staff at the airport, the TSA folks, the air traffic controllers, the workers there. You may not know that the FAA has determined for our airport that we need 26 certified controllers. We currently have 19. Now, these are positions, of course, that with mistakes, with health concerns, if there are issues where folks need to take some time off, we're creating a very serious issue at our airport and for safety. Now, I want to be clear, the Long Beach Airport is safe. These air traffic controllers are incredibly talented, in my opinion. They are heroes, they work really hard to ensure the safety of all people. But I think I speak for a lot of folks when I say the biggest priority as we implement the FAA reauthorization is to follow through on our promises to build and support our workforce, ensuring people know what their roles are, and a safe experience for all passengers. Now, I think it's really important, of course, that as we have these conversations, we're looking at safety on all fronts. It's the safety for our traffic controllers, as well as our commercial pilots. The FAA, of course, the process of clearing someone to return for work for all of these positions after a medical or mental health issue is also really important, and we know that you're all involved in this work. We all agree that we need to be completely certain it's safe before putting someone back in a tower or a cockpit. I know that there was an internal presentation at the FAA last month suggesting staff departures could affect the processing of medical clearances for pilots and air traffic controllers. Captain Reverend, can you share what the process of regaining your clearance to fly actually entails?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. So as I understand, you're talking about for a lost medical. So there's a couple of different avenues there. The special issuance is the one where we see the most problems in the past, and that has improved. We've been working with Dr. Northrup, who's a FAA flight surgeon, on reducing those timelines. But as an example, someone has a failed EKG, and in the past, there were times where the cardiac board was only meeting, twice a month or quarterly or even longer sometimes. And so this person had already been cleared by his AME. Hey, you're cleared to go fly. Everything's back within the right ranges, but he was waiting for that board to meet. So that's 10 years ago. This problem has been, on our horizon. Now they've gotten those down to an average of 90 days, which we're absolutely thrilled with. There'll be, departures here and there, but he works with his AME, who is not an employee of the FAA, and that paperwork, filters up.
Yeah, and Captain, I've heard those same stats. I think that's really impressive, and I think as the FAA presentation, the internal presentation that was presented, I'll talk about staff departures and how they could negatively actually impact this process. We've made so much progress, and yet these staff departures could really be a hindrance to the progress that we've made. Part of last year's FAA reauthorization created a working group to recommend ways of improving, of course, some of these procedures. The Aviation Rulemaking Committee also put out their own recommendations on mental health and aviation medical clearances last year. Captain, do you know if any of those recommendations, additional recommendations have been adopted by the FAA? And I know some of them have, obviously, on the timeline.
Yes, we're pleased with the progress, but you can never do too much. Specifically, you mentioned mental health. And we have a peer support program at SWAPA, but near and dear to my heart, maybe earlier this year, a classmate of mine, a 20-year employee at Southwest Airlines, took his own life. And so we've got a lot of room to work. We've got a lot of, it's a weakness for pilots who feel like, hey, I have to, John Wayne this, I got to keep a secret. If I tell somebody I need to talk to somebody, I'm going through this problem. We've also got to get towards a company with a just culture that encourages self-reporting as opposed to, having some sort of, a punishment type culture. And I do think we're making great strides, at Southwest Airlines and in the industry that side.
I'm out of time. I just want to thank you, and just to conclude, just say that mental health of all folks and their just physical health, whether they're pilots, whether they're traffic controllers, whether they're flight attendants, is so important. And I just hope that we recognize that these reductions are ensuring that we have a healthy team at all of our airports possible. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize our fearless leader of the full committee, Chairman Graves.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I actually don't have any questions. I think I'm pretty familiar with the reauthorization, but I do want to welcome all my friends here to the committee, and we appreciate your testimony, and we appreciate your insight as much as anything else. So thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
We appreciate you too, Chairman Graves.
Isn't he wonderful? Ms. Nelson, isn't he wonderful? We have strong leadership on this committee. I now recognize Mr. Stolberg.
Thank you very much. Currently, pilots and air traffic controllers who seek mental health care are unfairly penalized. While aviation professionals are mandated to report if they seek mental health care, once they take that step, they are faced with delays, confusion, and broad regulations to return to work. This often means that relatively minor health concerns results in long wait times and derailed careers for safe and well-trained pilots and air traffic controllers. As a former police officer, there were 2 times in my career that I needed help with calls for service. I was escorted out of the squad room by a Commander Lieutenant Bob Brazel, after an individual tried to kill me. Lieutenant Brazel said, "Pete, how you doing?" And in front of my colleagues, I said, "I'm tough, a hockey player. I've won in fights, I've lost fights, I'm okay." I was crushed inside. I left my night shift after the incident, sitting on the halls, the city step halls of Duluth, Minnesota, watching the sunrise over Lake Superior. Most beautiful sunrise I've ever seen. The grass was as green as ever, knowing I'm alive that morning. I needed that help at that moment because when I went home, I never told my wife as she was leaving for work what had happened. I go to roll call. Bob Brazel met me there. He knew I needed help. I needed that police counselor that night, and I got the help I needed. And I returned 22 straight years after that. And it was because I had a leader that understood that it's not, the stigmatism of mental health must go in this nation, because 1 in 4 of us, 1 in 4 of us adults are going to experience that in our lifetime. No matter what we do or say, we're going to experience that. And our professional airline pilots are no different. And when I hear that our airline pilots, when they ask for help, that they're removed, the stigma's there, they're delayed in getting help, and some of them can't even get their jobs back or delayed until they get their jobs back, which affects their family. That is wrong, and that stops right here and right now with the Mental Health Aviation Act that I'm proudly sponsoring with Representative Caston from Illinois. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for what you do. Thanks for bringing clarity to the situation. It should never happen, and once that bill happens, if any of you need help, you will get it, the door will be open, and then you will return to your jobs carrying the most precious cargo, people. And you all know that. My goal is to have, if it happens, to have the same effect that counseling happened to me as a police officer. to be able to work through it, manage through it, because we have help for you. And never will you lose your job. And never will that stigma stay with you. Because we're all humans and it happens to us. And it happened to me almost 31 years ago. Even back then, I had a leader in the police department. And you were all leaders in the professional aviation. And I'm proud of each and every one of you. I fly a couple times every week. We all do. You carry us. And our families and our friends depend on you. Make no mistake, this committee, Chairman Graves, Chairman Nels, and my Democrats on the other side of the aisle all agree with this bill. This is not a messaging bill. This bill is going to get across the finish line in a bipartisan fashion. The president's going to sign it, and never again will you have to wonder if you should ask for help. I had questions prepared, Mr. Reverend, for you, and I'm sorry I didn't get to them, but I wanted to tell you all my personal opinion, my personal experience of asking for help. Asking for help is actual strength, and we have to honor that and make a commitment. Never again will you have to be forced to get into that cockpit if you're dealing with some issues around you or your family. Because remember, 1 in 4 of us in our lifetime as adults will need help. God bless you, and thanks for carrying us safely. Now yield back.
Congressman.
Thank you, Pete. Well said. I now recognize Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for convening this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses today for your testimony. The FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 was a historic bipartisan commitment to public safety, modern infrastructure, a stronger workforce, and consumer protection. But the law is only as strong as its execution, and right now that execution is being sabotaged. A year ago, we came together across party lines to move aviation forward, but instead of building on that progress, the Trump administration is gutting it, slashing the FAA and DOT workforces while tasking them with over 500 mandates is calculated sabotage. You don't modernize aviation by laying off the professionals who keep planes in the sky and passengers alive. You don't protect safety by sidelining the very people who ensure it, unless the goal is to watch the system fail and pretend it's not by design. Now, Congress did its job, and the administration now needs to do theirs. Stop the sabotage and implement this law fully, swiftly, and in good faith. Democrats are watching. We're not backing down, and we will not let politics put lives at risk. And I'm personally happy that Elon Musk has left the scene. Mr. Bolin, the National Business Aviation Association represents a wide range of small businesses and operators across the country, many of them based at regional airports that rely on federal contracts and grants. Now, the Trump administration is trying to dismantle the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, a long-standing initiative that helps minority and women-owned small businesses fairly compete for those contracts. Are you concerned about the impact of eliminating the DBE program and what impact that elimination would have on small operators in your association and the business opportunities in the aviation industry overall?
Mr. Johnson, you're correct. Business aviation does involve a lot of small companies, mid-sized companies. I think 85% of our members are small and mid-sized companies.
And some of them are disadvantaged businesses as well, correct?
That's correct.
And so shouldn't we be continuing the DBE program?
Well, there are a number of programs that I think.
Shouldn't we be continuing those?
I think what we want to do is make sure that there is access
And
a
that's
broad
what the programs, that's what the DBE program tries to make available, is to be able to get access. What's wrong with that?
Probably
Or
not.
is it simply because it's It falls under the DEI category, and you don't want to talk about that right now to jeopardize whatever you are trying to protect. I understand, but let me move on. Ms. Nelson, at our last full committee hearing on the implementation of the FAA Reauthorization Act, one thing was clear. Our air traffic controllers are working under intense pressure, long hours, high stakes, and this atmosphere of fear created by constant political games is wearing them down. That's a heavy burden for anyone, but I imagine it's just as hard, if not harder, for flight attendants who are working exhausting hours at 30,000 feet, and they are responsible for the safety and well-being of every person on board. Can you speak to how the chaos and instability in these few months of the Trump administration has impacted flight attendants and others on the front lines of aviation safety?
First of all, we count on our air traffic controllers, and we're very concerned about the stresses that they've been under and our safety inspectors. This directly affects us on the job. If we don't have a system that is supporting us, there are questions from flight attendants saying, why are air traffic controllers being asked to justify their jobs? Why are they getting notices like everyone else, even though it wasn't intended for them to leave? And why are their pensions being attacked? Because this kind of instability is not supportive of keeping people focused on safety. We know, and I appreciate very much your question about flight attendants. We're in the middle of bargaining and trying to address some of these issues with the airlines. It's very difficult to do our jobs when you have all of this instability going on, and when we also see that demand is softening because people don't want to come to the U.S. Ticket prices are dropping, and as we're bargaining, that's a real concern too. So everyone is concerned with that instability, and we know very well that in order to have a business work, you have to have stability in order to invest, in order to staff up, in order to be able to do the work. So the attacks on pensions for federal workers and collective bargaining agreements, we also feel on the job too, and we feel that transition also into our discussions with the airlines.
Thank you. My time has expired, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Hurd for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Chairman Nels and the Ranking Member Cohen for holding this hearing. I represent a very large district in western and southern Colorado, Colorado's 3rd Congressional District. It's basically half the geographic footprint of the state. One of the facts that blew my mind when I was originally running for office, and I think surprises a lot of folks back east, is that it's larger geographically than the entire state of Pennsylvania. So it is a big district, and general aviation airports are crucial for accessibility, for emergency services, for ag operations, for economic development. I wanted to ask Mr. Bolin, now that the FAA is 1 year into implementing reauthorization, how effectively has it implemented provisions intended to support and modernize rural aviation infrastructure?
Well, I think that was one of the really great accomplishments of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. As you well know, we saw the funding levels for airports go from $3.35 billion to $4 billion, with a lot of that specifically directed toward rural airports. And that's critically important because, as you articulated, these airports are lifelines for rural communities. They provide medical support, they provide emergency relief, they're there in times of disaster. We need to make sure that those airports have an opportunity to survive. They have an opportunity to do matching grants, and I think that's exactly what this committee had in mind, and I think that it is an enormous step for the United States to keep its leadership in every aspect of general aviation.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's critical what these services in airports in rural parts of the country for sure, and it's important that we make sure we're continuing this implementation to help those rural parts of our country. Mr. Pleasance, is the FAA doing enough to ensure general aviation airports have sufficient infrastructure funding during their implementation of the reauthorization?
So is the FAA doing enough? Is that the question?
Yes, sir.
That's a great question. I don't see evidence that they're not doing enough. However, some of the examples I gave earlier around some of these smaller airports that are suffering from some of the fees, you do have examples out there where you've got singular FBOs operating in locations and to some extent take over the economics of that airport. And I think our concern from an FAA perspective is not as much enforcement of the grant assurance language around fair and reasonable fees that ultimately do affect the ability and attractiveness of the flying public to use those airports. And it's not every airport, right? This, by and large, a lot of the small airports, call it in the middle of nowhere around the country, are doing just fine, but there are a number of airports that are important access points to parts of the country, including out in your part of Colorado, where we do have concerns that we're seeing increasing evidence of fees going up, access to those airports going down, and the FAA not doing as much as we believe they should do to ensure that the access to those airports remains viable.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Mr. Bolin, back to you. Workforce development and retention are critical issues for rural districts like mine and Colorado's 3rd district. Pilot workforce shortages have particularly impacted rural regions who've seen reduced service to their communities as a result. And having a strong general aviation pipeline is key to ensuring that we have a strong supply of commercial pilots. What are some ideas or initiatives that your members have considered to address these critical aviation workforce shortages to retain talent in our rural communities? And has the 2024 reauthorization been helpful in facilitating aviation workforce development in rural areas?
Well, I think the bill itself did a number of really important things. It created some important grant programs and provided $20 million for aviation maintenance technicians and a pathway to pilots. So those are important programs. I think the challenge that we all have is how do we raise awareness of what these opportunities are. There are a lot of people that have not focused on the opportunities available through aviation or see themselves in what they see as something different and apart for a different segment of the community. I think the efforts to go into high schools, the efforts that are being made by organizations like AOPA with their curriculum are really important. I think we also need to focus on our ability to work with the technical schools and the community colleges, another opportunity to make people aware of what is out there. So NBAA is working through its members. Fortunately, we've got people in every congressional district, and that gives us an opportunity to be part of the local community. We encourage career days at airports. We encourage going into schools. We can't do enough to express the opportunities that are available, the life-changing opportunities in aviation, and specifically general aviation.
Wonderful. Agreed. Thank you so much. I see my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Ms. Brownlee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pleasance, I have a question about so-called aircraft kits. About a month ago, there was a fatal crash in Simi Valley, California, in my congressional district, which involved a home-build kit airplane that crashed into homes and killed 2 people. According to the FAA does not certify or approve aircraft kits. Can you comment on the current safety regulations around aircraft kits and the certification process and airworthiness reviews, or maybe lack thereof, for these amateur-built kit aircraft?
Yes, absolutely. So part of what has made the U.S. as much of a leader in aviation as it is in large part because of our willingness to innovate, and the whole, they call it experimental aircraft or home-built aircraft movement has become a giant part of this ecosystem. The aircraft you're talking about in Simi Valley was a Vans RV-10. I'm very familiar with the accident. Vans has produced more kit aircraft than any other company, over 11,000 of them. The vast majority, 99% fly safely every day. And so I'm a very strong supporter of that ecosystem. I think to me it's a great example of how we as a country continue to innovate, because many of the innovations that make their way into certified aircraft come out of the home-built or experimental area. To your point around not being certified, you're right, they're not certified. However, that does not mean they don't have oversight from the FAA. They actually do. So as these kits are built, and they're very well-designed kits with very well-structured plans and sort of instructions on how to do it, each major stage of build has to be overseen by an FAA licensed mechanic to basically authorize it to move on to the next stage. So although they don't end up at the end being certified, like a certified aircraft would be, they do end up with a level of inspection that ensures it was built in compliance with the manufacturer of the kit's recommendation. So I personally am a big fan of it. I think it drives a lot of vitality. Accidents like that one, where that was a weather-related accident, not an aircraft-related accident. It could have been any other kind of plane. So I guess I would not want the general public to think that just since the word either experimental or home-built is used, it implies that there's a level of safety that is somehow given up. These aircraft are all still very, very safe aircraft.
Well, I don't think NTSB has finished their investigation
You're right.
around that crash in my district. And I also know that FAA doesn't approve the kit manufacturers. I guess what you're saying is the way the system is right now is what you would prefer, that there shouldn't be any further regulations around aircraft kits.
That's correct. And if we discover there's a problem, then a specific problem, of course, I would be very supportive of addressing that. But right now, I think the FAA oversight, and then in partnership with AOPA, also the Experimental Aircraft Association of Wisconsin, play a big role. We all have a vested interest in those aircraft being as safe as possible.
Thank you. Ms. Nelson, you know, this hearing is about implementation of the FAA Authorization Act. So from your perspective, in terms of the administration and DOJ cuts and the FAA workforce cuts, can you comment on if and how it has slowed down rulemaking and key priorities to keep moving forward on implementation?
First of all, I just want to note that as safety professionals, we learn the first rule in safety is to remove all distractions. So while we have, we very, very much appreciate the leadership of Secretary Duffy pushing forward on trying to modernize and staff up and work with the unions on all of that. But as at the same time, to have the administration creating all of these other distractions, it is undermining the process. And in specific areas of the bill that, of course, we're concerned about, doing away with committees, doing away with rulemaking committees, that is jeopardizing the plans of this committee and the direction from this committee and all of Congress on what needs to be done in all areas of safety in order to lift us up. We're very, very focused, obviously, on the modernization and staffing of air traffic control, but there are other portions of safety. You can't take any of those for granted, and there's a lot of priorities in the bill that are being sidelined because of what DOJ has done.
Thank you for that. And one quick last question, Captain Revan. I wanted to just check in with you on the overseas maintenance stations and if you believe there's anything more that needs to be done to ensure our safety standards there.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I can only speak to, you know, the Southwest Airlines and our methodology. We have a very, you know, rich and robust safety and inspection where we operate and take those planes down in South America. We have our Check Airman Corps, who are our most highly professional, you know, overseeing the rest of our pilot group that have a specific non-routine flight operations certification. They go down there and do that, and they put those planes through their paces after they take them out of maintenance, turn off switches, turn off systems, turn them back on. It's operating as it should.
I think my time is done, so I need to
Hope
yield
I answered your
back.
question.
Thank you.
The gentlewoman yields back. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Very proud to represent the great state of Wisconsin, and it is home to many great general aviation airports. The municipal airport in Watertown, Wisconsin, for example, has experienced issues with the FAA's eligibility requirements for a runway expansion project. Specifically, the airport is struggling to secure Airport Improvement Program, AIP, funding, even after conducting necessary environmental studies, rerouting a city road, and purchasing additional land for a buffer requirement. As the Watertown Airport has worked towards achieving AIP eligibility requirements, it's estimated the runway expansion project cost has ballooned from $2.5 million in 2005 to nearly $15 million today. The Small Airport Fund of the AIP establishes a calculation to ensure that a required level of discretionary funding is used on small airports. So Mr. Pleasance and Mr. Bolin, if you both could weigh in, what actions could be taken to help make AIP eligibility easier to obtain for smaller airports?
So that's definitely not my area of expertise. How I've got I'll call it sympathy for what feels like increasing levels of bureaucracy and overhead that the airport's having to jump through. I think, this body putting some additional guidelines and, in a sense, requirements on the FAA to impose a level of what we might call reasonableness in what's required to justify an airport. I see a couple examples in other parts of the country where extra dollars are being spent, in my view, to actually make the airport less safe, reducing the length of a runway, for example, or eliminating a cross runway that take dollars to accomplish. So I suppose it would be around this body's ability to provide greater clarity on the ability to simplify the path to improving airports.
Yeah, I'll follow up. I agree with what Mr. Pleasant said. I think one of the things that we've recognized in the United States is that it is difficult to build airports, build runways, and we want to make sure that we are able to create as many airports as we can. These are nodes in a system. The more nodes we have, the more valuable the system becomes. And as aircraft get bigger, we need longer runways, and we need to have the safety buffers built in. So I think what we really need to do is very much focus on what the impediments are and to address them. What you're talking about going from $2.5 million to $15 million, that has not served anyone, and it's not increased the health of Watertown, and it hasn't increased the safety in the system.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bolin. One for you. How is business aviation being integrated into FAA modernization efforts?
Well, I think we're part of the Modern Skies Coalition, and I think we recognize that the public airspace belongs to the public, and making sure that we have access to airspace and airports is critical. I think that's one of the things that has made the United States unique, and I think that that is our real strength. When we talk about things that will increase safety and increase efficiency, coordination, communication, connectivity, that helps everyone. The more precise we can be in our flights, the more clear we can be exactly where we are with clear situational awareness. That makes everybody safer, and that's why business aviation, general aviation, labor, commercial airlines, we're all in this together.
Is the FAA listening to and incorporating non-commercial general aviation airports?
I think the airport office recognizes the importance of airports. I think, as Mr. Pleasance has brought up, there are times when we would like to see more aggressive use of the Part 16 efforts. We know that in some communities, developers or others like the idea of the land, but we want to make sure that we have a viable national system of airports, and that's why we have the whole NBAA program.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I yield back. I recognize Mr. Desagne for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you all for being here. It's a combination of anxiety, but we want to be thoughtful to this. I've said this before. Mr. Chairman, I do hope that we're communicating with the administration, and Secretary Duffy is a former colleague. I've heard him make some comments after the terrible tragedy at DCA that indicated to me that he wasn't fully aware of the work we've done and are doing in terms of going after more money, which of course we would welcome from the administration, but just that coordination and the wonderful leadership we had from Chairman Graves to get this to this point. So, and I'm really appreciative that we're continuing to stay on it. Captain, I want to ask you a couple of things. First, in the short term, what are you and your pilots seeing on the ground about near misses, new technology that we're trying to get in? I know I bring this up all the time because it was my introduction to commercial aviation, the near miss 10 years ago at the Air Canada flight at SFO in my area, where we came within 54 feet. And if it wasn't for the co-pilot of the United plane, the first plane on the taxiway, and all the work we put in NOTAMs, what are you seeing from that perspective? Now that's 10 years ago almost. Have those things improved? Are pilots reading the NOTAMs? Are they more digestible? And in the near term, has that created greater safety from the pilot's perspective?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. On the NOTAMs part, it is getting better. They are starting to be they're a little more decoded than they used to be. They're starting to be a little more condensed. The packets that we tailor are very condensed for the areas that we're going, and pilots are very responsible about reading those. Our dispatchers are also fantastic for reviewing those, and in a 121 operation, making sure that you're safe and prepared for the location you're going to. To your question on the ground, it's getting better and better with the technology that's out there. We have the RAS, which is a runway advisory and a runway awareness and advisory system. I have to look at that acronym all the time.
Take some credit
basically
for
starts
getting
letting
that.
you know, hey, you're getting close to a runway, you're getting close to a taxiway. It's in about 83% of our aircraft at Southwest Airlines, and ahead of schedule for being 100% instituted. It's just another great tool. The concern and what I see out there, the concern that I have is with air traffic control manning. One of the pilots that was on the Midway flight, he brought up a great example with Secretary Duffy. He said, hey, here in Denver, routinely on weekends, they'll go to one controller that operates both ground and tower frequencies. That's a problem. That's a problem. And it's a manning problem. It's not being irresponsible. It's just having the coverage to do so. So as you know, every commercial flight, it's an orchestrated, event between air traffic control, the pilots, the ground operations, the flight attendants to get the passengers safely from A to B. So those are some of our concerns, just the manning and the coverage.
And I mentioned this just in the tower with the air traffic controllers again at SFO, and the thing that was alarming was retention, the burnout, particularly in those areas that have lots of flights in the urban areas where the differential isn't enough. So you think about attracting people into the field, whether it's pilots or air traffic controllers or mechanics. On the pilot side, I've heard from some of my pilots talking about the training and that difficulty of the great training that so many pilots got in the military and now trying to get that in the private sector. And one just anecdotal story is younger pilots will start at a training school in Arizona to go work for a regional airline and have never really been in bad weather before. Could you, and the anxiety that creates, do you have any comments on that kind of scenario and how we can improve that?
Absolutely. I think a good part of that is, experience, and there's lots of moves to try to reduce. There have been in the past, and I applaud this body for maintaining, the strict 1,500-hour rule for an ATP, but there's no substitute for experience. And oftentimes, folks will build those hours and they've never been in the weather. And so keeping that level of experience ensures that people have seen multiple different challenging, environments and platforms. And so we do have fantastic young people that come to our airline, and they have seen real weather scenarios, and they continue to see those with an experienced guy in the left seat. So I think it's working as it should currently, and I applaud this body on their decisions.
Ms. Nelson, if I just briefly, your folks are right at the retail point. We've had a lot of problems with stress and anxiety, COVID and post-COVID. How's that working out, just briefly? How are you dealing with customers who are stressed?
Well, it's a real challenge, and so more education and more communication. We did have, very, very clear communication from the FAA administrator repeatedly, and from the president in the last administration to make it very clear that people who acted out were going to jail, and that continued conversation and leadership from all of our leaders is very, very helpful, and we would actually ask for people to continue to be talking about that, continue to be talking about the consequences and making it very clear what we expect of people when they come to the airport.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Shreve for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the lady and the gentleman for sharing time with us today. I represent Central and Eastern Indiana. I've got the Indianapolis Airport in my district. We describe Indy as being at the crossroads of America. We've got a nexus of federal highways that traverse there. But as a consequence of that, FedEx has their second largest air cargo hub at IND, and that is growing by volume. Captain Revan, you move more passenger traffic through IND than any of the other passenger carriers. We're successful in securing a $27 million AIP grant and are rebuilding 5R out there, and we're nearing completion on that. And that we'll get another 40 years out of that runway, and that's just crucial to commerce, both cargo and passengers. But I wondered if you could speak from a pilot's perspective as to the importance of that hard infrastructure, that physical environment that they're bringing aircraft in and out of on, please.
Thank you for the question, Congressman, and absolutely support that, that project. UPS flies in and out of there, or FedEx, excuse me, flies in and out of there at a high volume. Mostly they do it at night, and that gives them some efficiencies when they're more heavyweight, and they need a little bit longer runway. It makes the flexibility for us much better, too, with any kind of inclement weather. So fully in support, always excited to see another project like that and an option in a safety environment.
Yeah, as with both Worldport, just down the road in Louisville with UPS, and at FedEx in Indianapolis, the busiest times of the day are in the middle of the night when all that traffic is sequencing in through there. And so that infrastructure really matters. Captain, I also toured Indy Center, and I've been up in the tower before. But we describe ourselves as the crossroads of America, but we've got a lot of traffic that Indy Center is managing. It moves from Atlanta into the Chicago area at different altitudes. And we're short on human talent at Indy Center, just as we are across the country. We've heard so much about the challenges in Newark that have acutely impacted United. I wondered if, from Southwest's perspective, there were pain points in the system that you would draw our attention to other than Newark.
Sure, there's a lot of pain points in the system, and it did not come about in the last 6 months. We've been seeing this decline, or this problem with air traffic control, manning, line of sight restrictions, et cetera. I have a lot of problems down in Florida. One example where the Homestead Air Force Base radar shuts down on the southern tip of Florida, and the whole TRACON at Florida shuts down. And so they've instituted some great things with the slowing down aircraft, doing the ground stop program to make sure they get those under control. And we have seen definite improvements. The manning continues to be a concern for us, for air traffic controllers. I was talking a bit with NATCA yesterday, and they did a great job in this testifying body, this last testimony with the challenges that they have. And we're just as supportive of them as we could be. They're absolute consummate professionals, the controllers. So we also applaud you for the grants and getting in the high schools and getting in early and starting to highlight that profession and the need for it.
We sorely need the talent. It would seem like it would be a profession that could be attractive to young people that, grow up gaming. If the hardware that they're working with was brought into the current century, I think that we would have the ability to pull young people into these cool, dark, windowless, bunkered sort of facilities as they move safely people and commerce around our country. But we are struggling with that at the moment. And part of that's a function of the very dated hardware, a DOS sort of world that they come into and can't identify with. I'm determined to make some progress with this. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Ms. Fushi for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. Fume contamination occurs frequently on commercial flights. Nearly all commercial aircraft draw outside air through the engines into the cabin, which is then recirculated throughout the cabin. As we all know, the recent FAA Reauthorization bill included numerous provisions to help address this issue, including a requirement to complete a study on the impacts of bleed air, the development of a reporting system for fume events that occur on board a commercial aircraft within 180 days, and the issuance of formal recommendations to mitigate the impact of fume contamination on cabin air quality by 2027. Ms. Nelson, while we look forward to the report findings and recommendations offered, what can be done now to improve flight attendant health and safety in the short term?
Thank you very much, and I would also include our flight deck partners in this. We actually issue a card to all of our members about air quality and what to do, how to recognize it and report it when you find it. This would be a very simple thing for all airlines to do and to provide it to not only all the crew members, but also maintenance. We have issues today where we will have a flight return to the gate because there is a report of dirty socks, the smell that you get when you have that contaminated bleed air, a report of people feeling headaches, feeling nauseous, and it will return. And sometimes when the maintenance crew and the crews do not know what's going on with that, they will tow the plane away from the gate, deplane the passengers, keep the crew on board, and fire up the engine so that the crew, the flight attendants, are subjected to those fumes again. So if we're providing information to all of the pilots and flight attendants and maintenance, we will avoid very serious and unnecessary events like that.
We'll hear from others if you care to speak.
Obviously, we echo the same concerns, and I appreciate the pilots have even one more concern that not everyone else deals with, and that's the amount of radiation. It's in the cockpit. So one of the things we've engaged the company and a lot of other carriers have too is what comes in the factory, the safety information or the safety equipment, and their appeal that carriers don't strip that safety equipment off, like sunshades and things that can protect you from the UV. And then we look forward to also the outcome of that study on the bleed air. So thank you for the question.
Additionally, Ms. Nelson, your testimony highlights the danger of radiation exposure to fertility and viability of pregnancy. While you mentioned no action has been taken at this time, what would you suggest be done to increase radiation exposure education and safety for flight attendants?
There is a form on the FAA site that could help you track your radiation exposure, but that link is dead now. If we could direct the FAA to make that available again, and then encourage the airlines. There can be encouragement from Congress, there can be encouragement from the FAA to provide information to flight attendants and pilots to be able to track that and make good decisions for themselves. This is something that is done in Europe, and flight attendants and pilots can avoid flights when they are pregnant or they're trying to get pregnant to be able to avoid that radiation exposure, because this has been quite an issue, not just with fertility, other illnesses as well. But understanding your potential risks helps you make choices to be able to avoid those risks.
Thank you for that. And finally, we tend to forget that ramp workers play a role in commercial air travel because travelers do not interact with them directly. But the reality is that countless travelers rely on baggage handlers. When you consider the duties that they perform, we can see that this work can quickly become dangerous. In your testimony, Ms. Nelson, you shared that significant training challenges and hazard concerns persist for ramp workers. Can you share more about these challenges and concerns, highlighting which ones you believe are the most important or the most urgent for the FAA to address?
Sure. A lot of this is about staffing up, of course, with the assessment of what's happening across the airport. But what can happen right away is that all of the airlines can be directed not to have ramp tasking schedules that are unrealistic with task times. These are things that are within the airline's control today. Avoid overlapping assignments and rush transition for these workers. And, of course, education for everyone. We have had people die over the last several years, and it is unacceptable and inexcusable. And it is part of the drive towards productivity in very low-paying jobs, I will say, with oftentimes without benefits, and then also asking them to do more with less. And so this is something that the airlines can actually step up on right away and make these situations better while the FAA is addressing the rest of the priorities here.
Thank you for sharing that. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. I now recognize Mr. McDowell for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here to testify before the subcommittee today. Mr. Boland, I want to discuss pilot mental health and the recommendations in last year's reauthorization bill. As you know, aviation professionals such as pilots and air traffic controllers are required to report if they seek mental health care, but admitting to receiving mental health care can result in a bureaucratic paperwork shuffle at the FAA that prevents pilots from going back to work. This is unintentionally punitive, in my opinion, and it eliminates the incentives for aviation professionals to seek mental health treatment that they need. With that in mind, how would you recommend that the FAA address this issue while prioritizing the safety of our airspace first and foremost?
Well, I think a couple of things are happening in this area, and I think, as we heard earlier, 1 in 4 adults is impacted by this issue. It is significant in scope, and the risks are significant. So we've got to do things where we understand better what the options are. There was a aviation rulemaking committee, and ARC put together on mental health that completed its work and has made recommendations. And then, of course, the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 focuses on the medical, aeromedical office, but specifically focuses on mental health as well. So I think understanding more about what we are talking about and understanding those treatments. We heard Captain Revan talking about the peer-to-peer focus at his airport. I think the important thing is we find ways for people to come forward, to destigmatize, and then to take the appropriate steps based on what the situation is today, not what has happened years ago, or finding new ways to move forward. And there has been progress. We have seen medications that are now available that were not before. So I think we are making progress, but I think this has to remain a front burner issue for everyone in the United States, but particularly the aviation community.
Sure. Thank you. Captain Revan, same question to you. How would you fix current policy to ensure that pilots aren't punished for seeking help?
So thank you for the question, Congressman, and I agree with much of what Mr. Boland said. In addition to that, we've had some very productive meetings with the FAA administrator or flight surgeon, Dr. Northrup, and she's been very open to our inputs. The 8500, the Form 8500 that you accomplish when you're getting ready for your flight physical, that's in need of update. There's questions on there that just shouldn't be asked. I think that one should be asked differently. Sure. That you referred to, the amount of look back that you have to go, okay, I have to keep track of each doctor's visit that I did for how many years. So I told you that last year, so I'm just trying to do this form correctly. Some of it's just redundant, and it's overly burdensome on the member. That's probably the most important one to me that you mentioned about the pilot mental health question. I think we need to look at how we word that and what we do with that information. We have a group that meets regularly, and I would be happy to provide some bullets. We did this for Secretary Duffy when he first kind of came out of the gate after the Midway incident. He said, "Hey, what should we be looking at? Through our government affairs and our subject matter experts, we provided a huge list of bullets. I would be really, I would be hopeful that I could do that for you in this area too, sure. As far as the Form 8500 and the mental health.
Well, I appreciate it. And Captain, I got another question for you. Everybody in this room is familiar with the FAA's issues with outdated air traffic control equipment. In your testimony, you say that the FAA must move faster to address these concerns, but in your view, what, if anything, is preventing the FAA from moving quickly to modernize ATC equipment, particularly in light of congressional support for equipment modernization and recent directives from the Secretary?
So to me, it's appropriations. So we've got the bill, we've decided how much money we've got to spend, but now we've got to responsibly put it where it needs to be to get those folks. And delays, I've heard this in the military a ton of times, and you've all heard this freedom isn't free, but I would say the same thing is even more so about safety. We've got to get the funds out there and get the money spent and get the projects underway, as fast as possible to avoid another mishap.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Ms. Gillen for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses here today. Chronic underinvestment and lack of focus on the New York airspace poses a serious threat to the safety of our region and to our country. Multiple times over the past few weeks, radar and communication systems that help controllers direct planes in and out of New York Airport failed for as long as 90 seconds at a time, leaving controllers unable to see or talk to planes in the area and resulting in major delays, cancellations, and leaving passengers stranded. These failures could have had deadly consequences and caused extreme mental anguish to the folks working in the TRACON and in the air traffic control space. I'm proud to represent New York's 4th Congressional District on the South Shore of Long Island, and New York's air traffic control facilities, including TRACON N90, is in my district and is one of the most outdated and understaffed in the country, yet it manages the nation's most complex airspace. We must do more to address our outdated infrastructure and bring New York and our national airspace into the 21st century. I recently led a bipartisan group of my colleagues in sending a letter to the House Appropriations Committee urging the inclusion of critical language in the FY26 appropriation bill to prioritize New York airspace for modernization, to increase efficiency, reduce congestion, and maximize runway capacity to better serve air traffic needs and keep our skies safe. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this letter.
Without objection.
Thank you. So, Mr. Nelson, you mentioned the recent issues at Newark in your testimony. As your union pointed out last month, experts have been sounding the alarm for decades that the infrastructure must be rebuilt and must be modernized. How have your union members have been impacted by the chronic underinvestment in the New York airspace over the past few years, and what can Congress do to further facilitate the modernization effort? Thank you, Ms. Nelson.
Thank you. So when flights are delayed or canceled, flight attendants are deterred from their schedules too. This can have an impact on our pay. It can have an impact on just getting home to our families and doing our duties at home. And ultimately what happens is that our air traffic controllers are not going to run an unsafe system, so they're going to slow down the capacity. That will have major economic impacts on the New York area and frankly on the rest of the country. So much of our air traffic flows in and out of the New York area. Specifically, the flight attendants who are based there have now lost their schedules in many cases because capacity has had to be cut. That means that they're losing hours and opportunity for pay. It also means that they are often delayed many, many hours from getting home or rerouted or have other disruptions to their lives. So we have concerns first and foremost, of course, for safety, and we thank our air traffic controllers for making sure that they always keep that safe for us. But we have got to do more, and we support your letter to the Appropriations Committee to get this money out and get these programs going as quickly as possible. We're way behind here, and I'm glad that everyone is paying attention now, but we've been screaming it from the rooftops for over a decade.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Mr. Boland, in 2022, you submitted written testimony to this committee on some of the work your association is doing to mitigate the impacts of aviation noise on local communities. In that testimony, you mentioned the importance of the FAA's Next Generation Air Transportation System Initiative, or NextGen. In last year's bipartisan FAA Reauthorization Act, Congress required the FAA to expedite the implementation of a number of NextGen programs and to develop a plan to accelerate the acquisition rates of NextGen systems in commercial aircraft fleets. Unfortunately, the FAA has failed to meet its deadline, leaving communities like mine vulnerable to the harmful impacts of aviation noise. How important is it that the FAA implement this provision, and what else can we do to mitigate the impacts of aviation noise?
Well, I think that what we have seen is that when we began focusing on flight plans, the idea was to bring everything together so that everything would be neat. The problem with that is it exacerbated some of the noise over specific areas. So we have done intentional displacements to try to spread that and make the impact less significant. But we do see that there are opportunities to potentially hold aircraft higher or longer is one of the ways that we believe that noise impact can be reduced. We also believe deeply in working with the communities to make sure we understand what their concerns are and they understand what the pilots are safe flying through as well. We don't want to compromise safety, but we do want to fly friendly. And that's why we've set up a number of working groups at various airports. Teterboro Users Group, for example, is one of those where we work to have a dialogue, and the FAA has helped facilitate that. But clearly there's more work to do to find the proper balance between flying safely and flying as a good neighbor.
Thank you. And just following up on that, in terms of crowded airspace like the airspace over my district, where you have flights coming into LaGuardia to JFK, also in that airspace is Newark as well. Is it possible to mitigate noise with rerouting since it's such a crowded airspace?
Well, obviously that's congestion creates challenges, and that is, as you have articulated, some of the busiest and most complex airspace in the country. I think, again, focusing on how do we operate safely, but where can we find additional ways to be more neighborly is an appropriate endeavor.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. Under for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all the witnesses here today. Mr. Pleasance, you raised serious concerns about the misuse of ADS-B data in lawsuits and fee collection. Could you elaborate on the privacy and safety risks of these practices?
Absolutely. Yeah, the ADS-B, aircraft equipped with ADS-B, basically put out a signal that includes a lot of information, including the altitude, the speed of the aircraft, as well as the registration number, the N number of the aircraft. And that's essentially visible to anybody who's got a receiver to receive that data, which is very easily obtained. And we're now beginning to see increasing evidence. There was one not that long ago up in Seattle area, just north of Seattle, for example, where an individual was served with a lawsuit for an aircraft that had flown over his house. Not low, he was up at several thousand feet, but because the person on the ground is not someone who enjoys aircraft, he got the ADS-B data, was able to identify who that was flying the airplane and filed a lawsuit for harassment. And he won't win the lawsuit, but that's an example of of a burden on that pilot, where in a sense his privacy's been violated, and he's now having to defend what was a completely legal activity.
Yeah, I'm a pilot myself, and one day a fellow pilot came over to my hangar and asked and told me a story. This is Spirit of St. Louis Airport in Chesterfield, and yeah, he flew about 2,000 feet above a plane, and he got a demand letter, not a lawsuit, but a demand letter. I understand also there are cases of airports or FBOs using ADS-B data to enforce landing fees. Is this
correct? There's an increasing prevalence of that around the country, where because the ADS-B, as I said earlier, can be collected by essentially anybody, that data is being used to assess various forms of fees. Oftentimes it's landing fees. And our concern is less that an airport charges landing fees. They're allowed to do that. We do care about them being fair and reasonable. Our bigger concern is the fact that ADS-B data is being used for that, which creates a deterrent. If you're if you're a pilot that has not yet implemented ADS-B in your aircraft, you start to hear these stories, whether it's about these frivolous lawsuits or about collection of fees, and it becomes a disincentive to employing that technology on your aircraft. And we at AOPA are very supportive of ADS-B. It's a good technology. It does increase safety in the airspace system, and we'd like to see more people choosing to employ it. And these kinds of activities are directly against that, which in the end ultimately reduce safety.
And of course, ADS-B, and maybe you could elaborate on this, isn't required everywhere.
Correct.
But as the AOPA, as a private pilot, the FAA, we'd like to see
pilots using it everywhere, but in a way, we're creating an this cottage industry monetizing, because it's my understanding that, that businesses are coming to FBOs and airports and saying, look, we'll help you enforce your landing, landing fees but with ADS-B data. We're creating an incentive for not only pilots who maybe have older planes that don't have ADS-B data now, but also planes that do, pilots to turn the ADS-B off by flipping the breaker.
Yep. Yeah, that can happen. We, of course, don't encourage that. We don't like that to happen.
Of course not.
But it does create an incentive in the system for those kinds of behaviors. And so we're, and you're right, ADS-B is not required everywhere. There are many places out in the middle of the country that are far from other airports and far from other aircraft. And so there are still a number of airplanes that do not have ADS-B installed. And the kinds of activities that we're talking about here are absolutely a deterrent to putting that technology in.
So the AOPA has expressed concern about a patchwork of state laws to restrict ADS-B data misuse. How many and which states have implemented their own laws to address this issue?
It's early days, but Montana, for example, just passed a law that prohibits the use of ADS-B for collecting of landing fees, or fees in general, not just landing fees. I know it's going through the legislature in Minnesota at this time. I know there was a hearing on this exact topic in Pennsylvania just yesterday. And so it's beginning to basically expand around the country. Of course, our concern is that on one hand, we're happy that the states are taking notice of this and are concerned as we are. We are also, though, concerned about a patchwork of different laws around the country that just create a level of complexity that's not as good as if this was a national approach.
So this situation begs for a federal approach?
I think so, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I yield back. The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Kalbahoff for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Nelson, our nation's aviation workforce is critical to maintaining the safety of our nation's airspace. This committee took action to assert the importance of this workforce by including various safety improvements in the bipartisan FAA reauthorization. One of the issues that we took action on was the response cabin air safety and dealing with the toxic fumes created by engine exhaust and fuel fumes. Congress required the FAA to create a system for in-flight crew and mechanics to report fume events. Has the FAA moved forward with implementing this requirement?
No.
And are they going to be doing that in the near future?
We hope that they are going to move on this more swiftly because we need this reporting feature right now. We're taking those reports in through our union.
Are you aware of any timeline that they've come up with?
I'm not aware.
Thank you. Ms. Nelson, as a member of this committee, we have heard from various stakeholders about the impacts the indiscriminate budget and staffing cuts have had on aviation safety. One of the issues you flag are the cuts to the National Weather Service. For the benefit of everyone here and everyone listening, can you elaborate further on how cuts by DOGE to the National Weather Service impact safety?
Yes, and I have an update to my testimony as well because shining a spotlight on this has appeared that there has been an effort to try to restore the vacant positions that were created by DOGE with these incentives for people to leave. But we're bringing on new people to fill these positions who have not been trained, who will have to get up to speed. And the problem is that we need to be providing real-time updates to ATC and to our pilots and our dispatchers about these weather conditions so that we can predict this and start planning in advance. So this undercuts our ability to plan and also to address issues like trying to plan to avoid turbulence, which is a major, major threat in my workplace for very serious injury.
So it increases safety risks?
It increases safety risks, yes. And I do appreciate, though, the focus on this because it appears that the pressure is working to try to fix this. But in an effort to create efficiencies, we've created an incredible inefficiency, because now we're replacing these positions with people who need to be trained up and get up to speed on how to do the work. And so if they would have just slowed down and talked to the people on the front lines about how to make these systems better and work efficiently as we have done in the past, we may have a better outcome here.
Well, thank you. I think you highlight the fact that in the pursuit of finding efficiencies, the process was way inefficient to do so. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Inefficient and unsafe. It added safety risk, I should say.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pleasance, we know that we need to modernize our air traffic control system. The system needs to continue to enhance safety and promote innovation. Can you elaborate further from your organization's perspective on why we need to modernize the system?
Absolutely. The challenges we face today are decades in the making. This is not something that occurred since January or even in the last 5 or 10 years. We as a nation have built I call it a patchwork of technologies that enable the airspace system to operate today. As has been said earlier, it is the safest airspace system in the world, so it has worked. However, because it's a patchwork and you've got technology, some of which are decades old, and I've seen the evidence of floppy disks being used, you've got a network, and I'm an IT guy by background. I spent 20 years in the IT industry. We have allowed ourselves to, probably because of funding-related constraints and others, to build a patchwork of technologies that are incredibly expensive to maintain because of the gap in new technology and old technology and having to have them all work together. And we have not taken I'll call it a holistic view on what should the future of general aviation look like, or not generally, but a future of the air traffic control system look like. And how do we put in place a system that actually is built for a purpose, including eliminating the old technologies that to date we've dragged along from year to year to year, and with it an enormous amount of overhead and maintenance costs.
Thank you. Are you aware that as part of the reconciliations, the fees were raised on hybrids and electric vehicles, but only half of the money is going towards modernizing some of our systems? The other half is actually going for other things.
I was not aware of that, no.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm out of time. I yield back. Gentleman yields, and now recognize Mr. Mann for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Nels, and thanks for having this hearing today. Thank you all again for being here and being willing to testify. I represent the First District, the big First District of Kansas. Aviation is a critical industry in Kansas, as you all know, with roughly 100 general aviation airports, several commercial and regional airports, a huge footprint in aviation and aerospace manufacturing. The FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 included critical provisions to ensure that our aviation industries are able to improve services, bolster our workforce, and promote American innovation. Just a handful of questions for you, Mr. Boland. As you know firsthand, Kansas plays a vital role in general aviation, from aircraft manufacturing to training our next generation of pilots. As we look back 1 year after FAA reauthorization, where do you see the most critical opportunities or shortcomings in implementing workforce provisions, particularly those workforce provisions aimed at strengthening technical education and expanding aviation careers in the rural part of our country?
Yeah, I think the bill was excellent in outlining the importance of workforce and in funding certain grant programs. The Aviation Maintenance Technician Program and the Pilot Pathway Program are two outstanding examples of the focus on aviation careers that is necessary. And I think what we are seeing, and Kansas is a good example, Salina particularly with Kansas State Salina, with its focus on emerging technologies, AAM, unmanned systems, shows that as our industry is evolving, so too are the career opportunities. I think the hard part for us is making sure people are aware of those opportunities. I think a lot of people do not see themselves as part of aviation, but particularly as new technologies are coming in, that has the ability to captivate and motivate people. I think we're seeing this as advanced air mobility is really beginning to draw attention, drones, commercial space launch. There are a lot of opportunities. The more people are aware of it, the more we have an ability to recruit, develop, and retain the best and the brightest wherever they're from.
I agree, which is right into my next question. You mentioned Salina, where you grew up, my hometown. Salina's become a test bed for emerging aviation technologies, including unmanned systems and advanced air mobility. A year after FAA reauthorization, how well, in your view, has the agency done in supporting innovation hubs like Salina by providing the regulatory clarity and infrastructure support needed to scale these technologies and ensure long-term industry competitiveness?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is the FAA is recognizing the importance of innovation and the importance of bringing new technologies forward. And so whether it's signing the SFAR to enable advanced air mobility operations or the focus that we are seeing placed by this administration on things like the drone technologies coming forward with the BVLOS rules, I think all of that suggests that there is a need for hubs, as we like to call them, places where industry, academia, and government can come together. And Kansas State Salina is an example of that.
Yeah. Last question, again, for you, Mr. Boland, a little different direction. In your testimony, you discussed the urgent need to overhaul our nation's air traffic control system, which this committee's talked a lot about. You brought up the topic of ATC privatization. You mentioned NAV Canada is often hailed as an example of a system that works, but that it actually overpromises and underdelivers. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think there are a couple things inherent in that. One, ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, has done a safety audit of Canada, and what they concluded was that it was operating on a scale of 100 at about 65%. It is the lowest rating of any G7 country, and it's lower than 38 other countries. So safety is an issue, and they talk about the inability of Transport Canada to really oversee NAV Canada, the air traffic system. We also see reports coming out about terrible shortages in air traffic controllers, delays that are coming out. We saw just last week a pilot got on the microphone and said, we're being delayed because we don't have enough air traffic controllers. And then it focused on an operator and owner of a small airport in Vancouver that talked about 20-minute to 2-hour delays are routine, and they're only flying 20-minute legs. So I think a lot has gotten ahead of itself about what they have in Canada. The reality is the United States has the largest, the safest, the most efficient, and the most diverse mix of aircraft and operations in the world. This is about finding ways that America, our innovation, and our ingenuity can take us forward.
Well, thank you for the insights, and thank you all for being here. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Garcia. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member, and of course, the witnesses here today. Ms. Nelson, I appreciate you including in your testimony an update on Section 438 of the FAA bill requiring the GAO to complete a review of airport service workforce, and they've committed to comply with its due date later this year. I agree with you. Airport workers are the foundation of our air travel system, and for too long, they've been denied a living wage and benefits like paid time off or health care. GAO recently updated us on this review, and they stated that it would be formally issued in September. Of course, this is just the first step. A public working group needs to be convened by DOT to discuss the report's finding and inform ways to further support this workforce. Ms. Nelson, why is it important that the Department of Transportation convene this working group to discuss the analysis, one, and why are better wage and benefit standards as My Good Jobs for Good Airports bill would accomplish important for our air travel system?
Thank you very much for the question, Congressman Garcia. So first and foremost, every single person, from the people who are working in the kitchens to the people who are pushing the wheelchairs, they are all part of the safety ecosystem. And in many cases, these are jobs that are low paid usually without benefits. What we see is that when workers can get a credential to work at the airport, that oftentimes they will get jobs doing several different things in the airport and sleep at the gates in between shifts. This is a problem with fatigue, with missing something, with making a mistake. It also leaves us vulnerable because people become desperate. And so it's not good safety culture to set people up for failure in their lives. And I have real concerns just in terms of aviation and how we are lifting everyone up in that space and helping everyone understand that we're doing something together. We can't do something together when some people are treated as second and third class citizens without benefits, without the ability to pay for their homes, and without public transportation to be able to get back and forth between their homes. They oftentimes will go days without seeing their families because they can't afford to go home and come back for these shifts that they have to work in order to just keep people fed and in a home, oftentimes with many families.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Recent incidents, including the tragic collision over DCA, remind us how urgent it is for full implementation of the FAA bill is. At Midway Airport, in my district in Chicago earlier this year, a Southwest Airlines flight had to perform a go-around to avoid a jet that had crossed the runway. I'm grateful for the pilots and the actions taken to avoid a potential disaster. It's another reminder of the importance of upholding strong safety standards in our aviation system. This includes updating obsolete equipment. The surface surveillance radar used at Midway Airport is composed of parts that are no longer being made, forcing the airport to look for replacement parts at other airports. Captain Revan, can you tell us what can be done to prevent runway incursions like the one that occurred at Midway in the future?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. You hit it on the head to start with. The surveillance equipment has got to be updated. The line of sight has got to be worked out with the towers. One of the things I heard in the testimony before this body last was a very disturbing. We spend 90% on our legacy equipment and 10% on innovation. That's got to change if we're going to. And then the last one, I'd put the plug for. It's absolutely essential to have 2 pilots in a commercial aircraft, 2 pilot complement. This pilot monitoring, and then also there were some things that came out of that where there was a narrative that the pilots were disregarding somehow the air traffic controller, and they needed to be punished. And like I said, it's a collaboration, it's teamwork. There's a positive safety culture of reporting and learning from one another. So all of those kind of holistically together. But the 90%, 10% was really alarming to hear from the air traffic controllers testifying in this last hearing. We've got to get that shifted.
Thank you, and again, thanks to all the witnesses. My time's up. I yield back, Chairman.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Knott for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the witnesses, thank you all for being here. This has been a very productive discussion. I've got some questions that I would love to ask, but before that, let me just reiterate that from my district, the 13th in North Carolina, there are small airports all over my district, all over the state. There are regional airports in North Carolina, even international airports, and we certainly appreciate all the contributions that each of you make to having a safer aviation environment. I will want to discuss this, though. There is obviously the need to discuss appropriations, but there's also the need to discuss the efficiencies. I mean, Captain, you just mentioned that we are committed to antiquated technologies and so forth. And internally, it seems like there are some very real inefficiencies and some sluggishness. And in terms of rebuilding the processes internally so that the FAA can have more flexibility, I'd love to go down that line if we could. And Mr. Bowen, I'll start with you. Given your experience, what are some ways that, I mean, quite literally, we can avoid having to require an act of Congress to go from floppy disks to cloud servers? Like, how can we give the flexibility needed to the agency to modernize and progress?
Well, I think the FAA bill gave some pretty clear directions on the importance of digitization of a number of the processes. We literally had a situation where a piece of paper could be buried on a desk and people weren't coming to the office, so nothing was going anywhere. The digitization is going to be a big help. I think some of the leadership is also really important. We've talked about the medicals, for example, and I know the flight surgeon, Dr. Northrup, has talked about how important it is to be able to track where your things are. You shouldn't be able to know more about a pizza being delivered to your home than where your medical is in the process. So I think those are some of the opportunities. And then I think what has been described as kind of the build the new system and be able to gather all of the efficiencies from better connectivity, better situational awareness throughout the system.
What are the ways to check and to make sure that those implementations are being done efficiently so that we don't add to the waste, but we remove waste, in your experience?
And I think that's exactly what we're doing here today. When this oversight committee brings oversight and is able specifically, like you were a couple weeks ago, to ask the FAA, where is this report that said you will do the following things? And I think what you are asking them to do is very intentional to drive results that are going to increase safety and increase efficiency.
Mr. Pleasance, I want to ask you a few questions. I saw in your biography that you are a former Bush pilot in Alaska, and there are lots of small plane pilots in North Carolina. I've had the chance to use Bush pilots in Alaska. They're the best pilots in the world in many respects. In your opinion, is the FAA sufficiently accommodating those sort of legacy pilots with the freedom and flexibility and really avoiding the sophistication required to go through a bureaucratic rigmarole that seems to be the case for newer, younger pilots?
I think so in general. I mean, the current environment, especially with, as Mosaic, I hope gets across the line this summer, there have been innovations like Mosaic that will make it easier for young pilots to get into aviation and learn in small aircraft that lower the overall cost, the burden basically to become a pilot. I think the rules in general so far have remained quite open to making it easy for people who do want to do backcountry flying. You've got organizations like the Recreational Aviation Foundation whose whole mission is to preserve these backcountry airports around the world, around the country. Yep. And I think they've done a good job, and the FAA, from what I've seen, has so far been generally supportive of that.
Great. If that ever ceases to be the case, I trust you'll let us know.
No, we would raise that very quickly.
Yes, sir.
One thing I might add, if you don't mind, just to Mr. Boland's comment too, you asked about efficiency and from an IT perspective. I do think there's a preponderance of intention in the FAA, historically at least, to customize what gets put in. Everything's got to be just exactly the way they need it, and having done a lot of work in IT over the years, to the extent that they can take more commercial off the shelf and not try to customize every single thing, that will be an important step forward in a more efficient implementation of the systems.
Captain Reverend, just briefly, I've heard from numerous pilots that there's a great need for the medical office reform in the FAA, that they still utilize snail mail, which was just astounding to me to hear, and that pilots can be placed on inadvertent leave for 6-7 weeks just from a process standpoint. How can we improve that process for the pilots?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. First, I'd like to take exception to your comment about Bush pilots being the best pilots. But after that, I would say that work is underway. There is improvement, and this is, like Ms. Nelson said earlier, these problems are 10 years old.
Yeah.
We're starting to kind of see the light. With this 53-person coalition, we're all kind of pulling from the same side of the rope now, and we are seeing great improvements. Some of the ones that we've seen at Southwest Airlines, some of our pain points have been deferrals versus denials. And then just the timeliness of, hey, what do I need to get in to make sure that my, physical is deferred? And unfortunately, that could come at a time where your physical's due. Yep. So you're not on any type of benefit, but you're sitting home without a qualification. Yep. And so Dr. Northrup's office has been fantastic about trying to work these onesie-twosies, but we still have that situation in the pipeline where, it's one big stack with both general aviation and with professional aviators. So we're trying to kind of work through that with our office.
Great. Thank you, sir. My time is over. I yield back. Gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Poe for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm very happy that this committee is continuing to focus on the critical issue of airline safety by ensuring full implementation of the FAA Reauthorization Act. Last month, I was proud to join the subcommittee chair, the vice chair, and the ranking member in seeking for robust funding for FAA operations and for the equipment that they use to safely direct flights. This is in addition to the emergency supplemental funding I called for with many of my New Jersey colleagues to address the technology and equipment failures that have led to the delays and chaos at the Newark airport. This funding is absolutely vital in helping to resolve the disruption at Newark and airports around the country. I appreciate all of our witnesses for highlighting the continued need for FAA to implement critical provisions from their reauthorization. Mr. Bolin, if I may start with you, I represent Teterboro Airport, which is an important business aviation hub. The breakdown at the Philadelphia TRACON have impacted airports around the Northeast, including Teterboro. Is FAA doing enough to manage the telecom failures in the short and long term? And how will modernizing the air traffic control improve communication systems and the subsequent effects of these systems break down?
Well, I think when we look at Newark, we understand that the failure largely was a result of copper wires. There was 2 lines of redundancy. We now are adding a 3rd line. We're bringing in fiber optics. So in that specific instance, I think we're moving forward, and I think that's an example of what we need to be doing across the country, making sure that we have the infrastructure, whether it's fiber, whether it's radios, whether it's radar. I do think we will also have an opportunity, because situational awareness will improve. We'll be able to be more precise in how we are moving the aircraft, and while congestion is congestion, we will be able to see more opportunities to have more precise routings that can allow different options to be able to shorten ground holds and to be able to move forward.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Quickly, and I know I want to just try, I have several questions, so I'm going to quickly go to Captain Raven. You've advocated for air traffic controllers to have access to flight deck as part of their training. How would that improve safety, and how would you, how do you believe Congress can help in that regard?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. It's about teamwork. As I said earlier, this is an orchestrated, ground ops, pilots, flight attendants, air traffic control, all safely taking you from A to B. We do this with our dispatchers. Our dispatchers right up front, and so the messages they send us, the weight and balance they provide, the fuel, they're able to see when they ride on a quarterly basis what it is we're looking at on our side of the radio. And it helps us to form that sort of shared mental model of how we're doing business. The same thing could be done, and air traffic controllers used to be able to do this, where they would ride in the cockpit and, they're giving us instructions, but now they can see what we see on our screen.
Right.
And so it's very helpful for that, that teamwork type of model that we have, for them to be able to have that access. So what you could do would be to expedite the security process that they would go through to be able to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. And quickly, I have, this question is for Ms. Nelson. In your testimony, you highlighted 2 provisions in the reauthorization where you aren't aware of any progress from FAA with regards to the turbulent-related injuries and radiation exposure. Can you please share how these risks can, in fact, harm crew members, and what type of information you're hoping to see included in the required reports?
Thank you very much for the question. Turbulence is a very, very serious injury, potential injury in the cabin, and we have a lot of flight attendants who are harmed by this. So implementing these procedures and best practices is critically important if we want to keep injury rates down. And if we want to move forward to try to avoid the potential of injury for passengers as well. In terms of the radiation, we do almost nothing in this country, and as I said earlier, there is a radiation exposure form that you could go to and check your potential radiation exposure on the FAA site. That form is, or that link is currently not working. So we're going backwards instead of forwards with the bill.
Well, that's a shame, and we certainly need to do something about that. Thank you so very much. Oh, it looks like I still have real quickly. If
Actually, on the other side.
I'm sorry.
No, you're
I
over
yield
by-
back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so very much. Mr. Begich, you're recognized. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few stats about my home state of Alaska. 82% of communities are not on a road system. 391 public use airports. We have the second most airports of any state in the United States, but we are 48th in terms of population. So air service is essential in Alaska. I appreciate the committee holding this important hearing on the Federal Aviation Administration, as safe and efficient air transportation is important for all Americans. Specifically, I want to point out that essential air service is critical for 65 rural and remote communities in my home state of Alaska. EAS is vital for rural connectivity, access to healthcare, and economic development. This program supports communities across my state, like Adak, Acatan, and St. Paul, and many other remote locations that lack any viable alternative transportation options. The program sustains access to basic services and economic opportunities in regions that otherwise would be cut off entirely. It is also important to point out that many of the smaller and more remote airports in Alaska and in the rest of the United States are close to and serve the regions where major oil and gas, mineral, timber, fisheries, and other resource development activities take place or will take place as we unleash our energy potential. So with that as a backdrop, first I'm going to start with Mr. Pleasance. Alaska's unique dependence on aviation for daily life and economic activity is unlike any other state, as you are well acquainted. What are the most critical FAA investments or policy actions that can directly improve safety and service reliability for Alaska's rural communities?
Great, thank you for the question. Yes, there's no more beautiful place in the world than Alaska, and I had the privilege of living in Talkeetna for a while, in Anchorage, and then essentially getting to see almost the entire state, never quite as far as Adak, but almost everywhere else. As you said, it's a very expansive geography, and so access to weather information is one of the most critical technologies that could be implemented, and I know the FAA has been doing that, but I think there's more that could be done, whether that's the ASOSs at airports that provide localized weather and real-time weather, or the webcams that are increasingly being rolled out across the state to just make it easier to understand weather, especially through passes that get used by virtually every pilot going from west to east or east to west across the Alaska range.
Thank you. And just to expand on that a little bit, are there any policies or implementation areas where rural states like Alaska need additional flexibility or targeted resources to meet their safety and operational needs?
The one that I'm most aware of right now would be around, for instance, this transition to unleaded fuels. There's some very unique requirements up in Alaska that fuel is only delivered typically twice a year on barges when the rivers aren't frozen, and so getting replacements of fuels as we make this transition to unleaded fuels, Alaska needs to be taken into consideration with a very unique understanding of the constraints that the state faces.
You're 100% right, and I appreciate you bringing that up. That is a top priority for us. One additional question, and this one directed to Mr. Robbins. Mr. Robbins, how might we leverage advanced aviation technologies like drones or hybrid aircraft to make EAS routes more sustainable and reliable in Alaska's challenging weather and geography?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Congressman. And actually, in preparation for this hearing, I connected with Kathy Cahill, who's the director of the UAS test site in your state. And truly, she's testified before this committee before, and truly a leader in trying to achieve exactly what you're talking about, which is being able to use drones and other autonomous systems in places that are otherwise dangerous or very hard to reach, whether that's for package delivery, whether that's for medical delivery. Some really unique use cases on emergency response, as well as search and rescue, being able to put up high altitude, long range endurance autonomous systems to find people that are lost, or to deliver something like an AED or something like that that's required. So Kathy's leading the way in Alaska and frankly throughout the entire country, and we're very proud of her leadership.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your due diligence in reaching out to her. She is a leader. She has testified before this committee. We certainly enjoy hearing from her when she has comments to share or new research to share. And please reach out to our office if you see some ways that we could start working on some of these technologies together.
There are some challenges, so we will reach out. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, and with that, I yield back. Gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Scholten for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Ranking Member, and welcome to our distinguished panel of witnesses. We really appreciate your time today and your commitment to making our airways as strong and safe as they can be. I am so proud of our committee's work on the bipartisan FAA reauthorization of 2024 at a time of immense gridlock and infighting in Washington. I often point to our work on that bill as a beacon of hope. And it is more important now than ever that this law is swiftly implemented so that that good work does not go to waste. We have the safest and most complex aviation system in the world, and we have to work together to keep it that way. So the committee's bipartisan FAA reauthorization included vital enhancements for the Aviation Workforce Development Program, as you well know. However, the implementation of this critical program seems to be lagging. It's my understanding that the fourth round of applications submitted by the February deadline for the existing pilot and maintenance grants are now in limbo, with applicants being told that they will have to resubmit once a revised notice of funding opportunity is issued, whenever that may be. Meanwhile, we have seen no movement in standing up the new aviation manufacturing elements of the program, something that is critically important to my district. Mr. Pleasance, have you or members of your organization received any updates or insights from the FAA about the status of these workforce development initiatives? And if not, how is the delayed implementation hindering workforce development efforts that are necessary to bolster aviation safety?
So we have been part of the effort to embrace the workforce development intentions behind the language that was in the, I think it was the NAC, National Center for Advancement of Aeronautics. I don't believe it got implemented last year or got included in what was sent to the Senate. So in the final bill, at least as I understand it, it was not included. However, we have been recipients of a grant along coming out of those efforts, and we've got our high school program, for example, that was mentioned earlier. We've had over 100,000 young individuals, high schoolers who've gone through that program, and it touches on not just becoming a pilot, but all various professions in the world of aviation, including maintenance. So I think progress there. However, as I understand it, it's nowhere near what was intended originally, and from what I understand at least, the FAA is not set up currently to truly be able to implement this. They don't have the workforce themselves in place, the dedicated resources in place to actually execute on the intentions of this plan. So I think they are falling short.
Yeah, and what, if any, impacts do you see that currently having now, or if these delays continue, what impacts would you foresee?
Well, I think, yes, there are impacts now in the sense that there are people who are not getting opportunities to develop skills that would allow them to participate in this aviation ecosystem you just described. And as was said earlier by Mr. Bolin, there's people out there today that would absolutely benefit that just don't even know about these programs. Yeah. So that's part of what we're doing at AOPA is to try to get the word out that there are enormous opportunities in the world of aviation. There are programs like our high school program and others that seek to help educate these younger folks around the opportunities there. But there's a lot more that could be done. And I think this program that's not yet fully going is a gap.
I
Couldn't agree more. The need in the workforce and the incredible opportunity that would provide for so many of our young people. Well, we'll keep asking the questions
Please.
and doing what we can to provide the oversight to move these programs ahead. One more question. My district is home to several innovative domestic aviation manufacturers, as I referenced in my question. Unfortunately, the administration's imprecise trade policies, including the president's recent calls to double tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, are harming the very manufacturing base they claim to defend. To help navigate the White House's chaotic, ever-evolving trade measures, I am working on legislation to best support American workers and manufacturers while lowering costs for consumers across the country. This is critical. Mr. Bolin, can you touch on how proposed or implemented tariffs are impacting members in your members' businesses?
Well, I think one way to look at it is to look at what has happened over the last 45 years when we had over 30 countries operating in basically a duty-free environment. So the 1980 Agreement on Trade and Civil Aviation has been able to help the United States dominate virtually every aspect of aviation. We have $120 billion that comes in every year as a result of our exports. The flip of that is we spend about $20 billion. So it's over $100 billion to our economy when we are operating with free, fair, reciprocal trade. And that's something that NBAA and I think a lot of others submitted for comment yesterday as the Section 232 hearings or investigation is underway at the Commerce Department, and certainly something that we've made clear. With that agreement, we've seen that fair, free, reciprocal trade allows the U.S. to dominate, as we have in every aspect of aviation for decades.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield yield back. back. yields. I now recognize Mr. Bresnahan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to underscore a major theme of today's hearing, safety. Aerospace safety is very personal to me. I am a licensed certificate holder for rotorcraft, as well as a Part 107 holder, and in the spirit of full transparency, I am a dues-paying member of your organization. I represent northeastern Pennsylvania, which is approximately 120 miles away from Newark, where we have 5 airports inside of our congressional district. We have Wyoming Valley, Cherry Ridge, Mount Pocono, Wilkes-Barre-Scranton International Airport, as well as Hazleton, where I also had the privilege of visiting the TRACON over the weekend, as well as the Air Traffic Control Tower. And really got to see firsthand. It was the first time I was able to put a face to a voice as to someone I speak to so frequently. And I know safety matters to each of us here, and to the pilots, the flight attendants, the mechanics, air traffic controllers, ground crews, passengers, and their families, who we all represent. Well, I wasn't in Congress last year when the FAA reauthorization was passed. I'm proud to work alongside my colleagues this Congress to advance aviation safety. I'm also very proud to have supported the $12.5 billion funding bump for ATC modernization in H.R. 1, as well as alongside Congressman John Garamendi from California, we're leading a bipartisan letter asking the FAA to reject any proposal to allow single pilot operations in commercial airline operations. I guess my question really surrounds ADS-B, and perhaps maybe with Mr. Robbins and Mr. Pleasance. I'm a helicopter pilot. Oftentimes I fly at relatively lower altitudes, and I had read in your testimony, Mr. Robbins, about the need for broadcasting on all various different types of aircrafts. And I know obviously in controlled airspace, we're more inclined and regulated to do so. But Mr. Pleasance, I'd be really interested to get your perspective on ADS-B in all airspaces. Sometimes northeastern Pennsylvania, predominantly a rural area. Sure, we have in and out, but aircraft comes up relatively quickly, specifically in darker environments, sunset environments. And I actually agree with the concept that we should be more proactive in broadcasting positions, specifically with gliders and rotorcraft, and now with the evolution of unmanned aircraft. I think it's something that we can
at least me personally, I'd be happy to support. So, Mr. Pleasance, I'd be interested to get your perspective from your organization and what you're hearing from your pilots.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's an important one because we all have a vested interest in aerial vehicles not encountering each other in the sky, and I think ADS-B is a critical technology that enables that separation. And you're right, it's not required in all airspace around the country, but increasingly a lot of the lower altitude airspace, whether it's helicopters, aerial ag planes, basically, crop dusters, unmanned aircraft that perhaps are out in these more remote locations, we want those all to avoid each other. So I'm personally, and our organization is a proponent of ADS-B adoption with two caveats. One is I think there's an opportunity to make it easier to adopt basically portable ADS-B units. They use these in Europe all the time, and balloons and hang gliders and powered parachutes and so on. There's no electrical system required, but they serve the core purpose of emitting a signal that says, I'm here, and allows other aircraft to see them. The second one is the privacy one I mentioned earlier. Anything we're doing in this country that dissuade people from using that technology, I think is a step backwards. And so we'll continue to advocate for improving the motivation for as many pilots as possible to adopt that technology.
Being from Pennsylvania, I'm really excited to see the outcome of today's state legislator hearings and what actually unfolds behind it. And I also read in your testimony about the privacy concerns amongst pilots, and I've heard it as well too. And there's a very solid campaign right now going around at local FBOs about the infringement there. But I was wondering if there was any more concrete examples that you can point to where a pilot or an aircraft owner received a citation relevant to the ADS-B information that was actually sent back to the FAA, and I'd be really interested to see some of that.
Yes, absolutely. There's a very tangible one with a seaplane pilot up in Connecticut that was doing touch and goes on a river, and somebody called in and reported the aircraft for low flying, but it was, of course, taking off and landing, so that's what you do. As you go up and you come down, and you're typically not very high. And so there was a claim made that this pilot was flying exceedingly low, and the only data that was in support of that was ADS-B data. And as you know, ADS-B data is only so accurate because it operates off of pressure altitude and has to be adjusted for barometric pressure. And so what you see get read by the system may or may not be exactly how high that aircraft is off the ground. So that's a very tangible one where that pilot has currently lost their license and is fighting to get it back. I also get emails almost every week, one just a week ago or so, out in Seattle area, where there's aircraft out there doing perfectly legal safety training, basically turns around a point, and they're getting, the FAA out there, the FSDO office is getting emails from a neighbor who's just not happy with the fact they're doing that, and they're pulling up pictures of that airplane and the N number and the ownership of that airplane every time. And it's not one airplane, there's many that go to do the training there. And so I think it's a further example of how, in this case, the FAA has not gone after the pilot. They're trying to educate the person on the ground, but it's creating a level of a dynamic that's not helpful, let's just say, from both a safety as well as a fairness perspective.
I appreciate that insight and appreciate all the witnesses for being here today. And aeromedical reform will be a continued conversation since I am out of time. And with that, I yield back. Thanks. Gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Norton. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The tragic collision near DCA earlier this year and several recent near misses at and near airports across the country demonstrate that swiftly implementing the safety and workforce provisions of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 must be a top priority. However, there are actions the Department of Transportation and the FAA can take beyond these provisions to improve aviation safety. For example, last month I joined colleagues in sending a letter requesting report language in the Transportation Appropriation Bill directing DOT and the FAA to commission an independent review of airspace design, civil military coordination, and operational safety in the National Capital Region. Ms. Nelson, do you think such an independent review would help improve aviation safety in the National Capital Region?
Yes, I do.
I am deeply disappointed to hear at this committee's hearing last month on the FAA Reauthorization Act that the FAA continues to allow military and other federal helicopters near DCA
and their ADSB transporters turned off. Despite the acting FAA administrator's announcement at a Senate hearing in March that the FAA is now recording ADSB transponders be turned off for helicopters flights in DCA Class B airspace, FAA Deputy Chief Operating Officer Franklin McIntosh told this committee that helicopter flights relating to law enforcement, national security, or the transport of government officials are required to use ADSB transponders near DCA. Their refusal to implement this critical aviation safety chain puts the lives of passengers, pilots, and flight crews at risk. Last month, I sent a letter to Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy urging DOT to require all helicopters operating near DCA to use ADSB transponders and to prohibit the use of helicopters for transporting government officials in the National Capital Region, except in case of a national emergency or the transport of the president and the vice president. Captain Raven, your testimony highlighted the need to upgrade aviation infrastructure to utilize ADSB transponders. Unfortunately, even when ADSB transponders are present at a military or other federal helicopter flying in DCA airspace, there is a good chance they will be turned off because of the numerous exemptions the FAA continues to permit. Would requiring exemptions to turning off ADSB transporters lower the risk of aviation accidents?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I appreciate that. And you're referring to the automatic dependent surveillance broadcasts that we have on our aircraft, and two different types, just to say. There's one that broadcasts out and one that receives. So as captains, as pilots, we want every piece of safety information we can possibly get. And the more of those that are turned on, the better that we can see traffic. There's no doubt to that. So. But as far as those decisions, the DOT and Department of Defense and FAA, it's a bit above our pay grade as far as national security goes. So understand that there have to be some balances from time to time. But the simple answer to your question is that the more that the ADSB is turned on, the safer it is.
Thank you, and I yield back. Gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. Vandrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I wanted to talk about drones. I'm going to speak about drones in a minute. I was concerned, my good friend from Georgia on the other side of the aisle, and he's a good guy, and I consider him a friend, and we have a lot of similar committees, so we debate a lot in judiciary. We fancy and think that this is more of a nonpartisan committee, but there seemed to be, and respectfully, Ms. Nelson, even on your part, the sense that I had when I was in here a little while ago, that chaos has erupted because of the new president and the new administration. And there may be some problems, there always are, and not everything that happened I agreed with. But let's understand we are where we are for years of past activity. Let's call it what it is. And let's just think about the chaos. The chaos is when we didn't install fiber when we needed fiber in our airports. The chaos was when I went to and visited air traffic controllers and towers, and they were using floppy disks that you couldn't get through any of their normal means of acquisition. They had to go to discount stores to see if they could find them. The chaos is when you have decaying copper. The chaos is when you moved air traffic control from Newark Airport. We moved it from New York to Philadelphia. Philadelphia without the STAR system in place, Philadelphia with decrepit, aging copper in place, Philadelphia where they were also, because of the reconstruction of the runway, had a lot of different issues and problems there as well. And on top of it, what we've had, it's just not resulted in the last 6 months. We have had a shortage of air traffic controllers, and for that matter, pilots, for years. We have a problem. These are the real problems and the real issues. And quite frankly, and again, I'm going to be candid, that's the way I am, we've been worried over the past years about which bathrooms to use, what pronouns to use, whether we can call the cockpit anymore. I mean, all this stuff. This is about infrastructure, it's about science, it's about staffing, it's about making sure that we do things the right way. There isn't just chaos in the last 6 months. This has been going on. Really substantive, underlying problems that need to be addressed. And I particularly wanted to say that because I heard that conversation between Ms. Nelson and Congressman Johnson. You know, the United States is over a decade behind the rest of the world in drone technologies and infrastructure, and we need to catch up. On June 1st, Ukraine launched 117 long-range, low-cost drones, and we saw the damage that they did. And the point of that is not that they shouldn't have done it, but how effective drones can be. And they say they only cost probably about $1,000 each to make. There's not a lot in place that would stop our enemies from utilizing these techniques against us as well. We know that Iran has drones. Some folks made fun. There is something called a mothership. It's not from outer space. It's these large ships like aircraft carriers that carry these drones. And we need a clear roadmap to protect our skies, to protect our critical infrastructure, to protect our America. And we've passed bipartisan laws to deal with this, but we've repeatedly missed crucial deadlines. Notably, Section 2209, intended to safeguard fixed sites, was enacted in 2016. It's 9 years later, still no rule. Mr. Robbins, thank you for being here today. Thank you all for being here. When do you think we can expect a rule for Section 2209, and what is driving this delay so long?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Congressman, and we appreciate the ongoing dialogue with you and your team on this issue. It is our understanding that Section 2209 is in a draft form and is currently at the White House under review. That rule is tied along with the Beyond Visual Line of Sight rule. So we are hopeful that we are going to see that draft rule released in the near future. And we've also heard that it's possible that through an executive order that the Trump administration may direct the FAA to move Section 2209 directly to an interim final rule so that it takes effect immediately. And then there's an opportunity to still perfect the rule, but it goes into effect right away.
And I thank you for that. And the way I say things, we're probably doing more now, get more done this year than has happened since that was enacted years and years and years ago where nothing happened. That's chaos. That's chaos.
If I could add one other point, sir.
Sure.
This committee is the lead committee of jurisdiction on expanding UAS detection and mitigation authorities. It's been since 2018 that Congress has updated the UAS detection and mitigation authority.
Unbelievable.
So,
Unbelievable. That's chaos.
It is far past time for those authorities to be updated and to give our federal authorities, as well as state, local, tribal, territorial, the ability to train properly and integrate, at the very least, detection technologies and in very bad day situations, non-kinetic mitigation technologies in the homeland.
We're out of time, but I just want to say record amounts of money are going to be coming into our airports and into our FAA. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Titus. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you get to me, everything's pretty much been asked. I appreciate that. I'm glad there was a lot of emphasis on workforce development. I worked with Mr. Molinaro in the bill to get that put in there, funding for it and support for it. So I know how much it's needed, and I'm glad that's moving forward across the whole industry. As we look at safety and air traffic controllers, though, and improving that system, I want us to be sure we don't forget about the contract towers, because some of those, I think, are behind in who they're contracting with or how few they have, and I want to put that on our list to consider, too. I thank Mr. Van Drew for asking about the drones. Another
part of that in terms of bringing us up to date was a rule I got in the FAA that calls for us to look at beyond line of sight. That deadline, too, was missed. That was last September, but I'm hoping that we'll see it come this summer. Can somebody, Mr. Robbins, can you address where we are with that and talk about why line of sight is so important? We see it in Nevada and rescue operations be needed or fixing power lines out in the desert where trucks can't go. So could you address where we are with that?
Yeah, absolutely, ma'am. Thank you so much, and thank you for your leadership of the UAS caucus here in the House of Representatives. So along with the Section 2209 rule that I just discussed with Congressman Van Drew, the Beyond Visual Line of Sight rule is now at the White House for review as part of the OIRA and interagency process. So we're hopeful to see the draft rule published soon. As you noted, that draft rule is now 261 days overdue from the statutory deadline set in the FAA reauthorization, and that puts the final rule deadline at jeopardy as well. So in the meantime, it is creating a situation where public safety officials, agriculture operators, drone delivery, medical, others have to go through a very time-intensive, labor-intensive, and very expensive process on a case-by-case waiver approval. Now, the FAA has done a good job of speeding up the waiver approval process, particularly for things they've seen before and can improve much quicker, so we give the FAA credit for that. But this is not a scalable model. Industry needs a rule to adhere to that they can then go out and operate to, and we stand ready to work with the FAA to implement this as quickly as possible.
Thank you. I hope to see that because there's so many good uses, not just the military ones Mr.
Right.
Van Drew talked about.
Thank you, ma'am.
For that thing. My other question will go back to privatizing air traffic controllers. Mr. Bolin, you mentioned it, but I wanted to ask Ms. Nelson how her folks feel about privatizing and why not.
Absolutely not. We shouldn't have for-profit in a safety system, no.
Just that simple.
It's that simple. We're fully opposed to it. But so is the entire industry. There was a letter earlier this year signed by everyone in the industry. We're all on the same page. There's a roadmap in the 2024 FAA Reauthorization Bill for us to move forward without privatization. And I think everyone's on the same page. We don't need any distractions from getting this done. And I would just add that, the breakdown of the air traffic control system is not just an economic issue and just a jobs issue and just a safety issue. What this also has is ancillary problems of more disruptive passengers because they're angry, they're stuck in the airports, they're stuck on the planes for longer. Flight attendants are facing that much more often. And flight attendants are also facing fatigue because our days are getting longer as these delays are going on. So there's a lot of problems, but the path forward is not privatization. It is moving forward with the bill that you passed last year, and the plans that Secretary Duffy has put forward too.
Thank you. I yield back. Gentlelady yields. Any further questions? No, I don't see any. Seeing none, this concludes our hearing for today. I'd like to thank each one of you. I think this is good stuff. We need to do this more often, right? This committee stands adjourned.